Yeah, my autism diagnosis was absolutely a turning point in my life. And it helps, but a lot of the problems still persist.
Huh. That's odd. You don't seem autistic.
No, definitely don't. Definitely don't seem autistic, no.
Now I see it. Hey, you wanna help me break the bank at a casino?
I could say day, you could say night. Tell me it's black when I know that it's white. It's always the same, it's just a shame, that's all.
Hey, hooligan, welcome back for more
Dick Jokes for Justice.
I'm Sam, and YouTube definitely won't let me monetize this one. You saw the content warnings. So if you laugh, or you learn something, or you want to support disability advocacy like this, you can help us out by joining the Patreon down there. If you're autistic, welcome, so am I, and for just this video, you'll see an occasional sarcasm switch in the lower corner over there. Now I'm going to talk about myself for a while, because I'm a narcissist. Of course, when I talk about myself on this channel, I'm usually describing my fuck-ups. That is what narcissists do, right? Run all their self-owns on a conveyor belt like an assembly line of failure? Oh shit, I canceled myself! Fantasy Lives Matter t-shirts for people who play Dungeons & Dragons. How did Ryan feel about Black Lives Matter? I haven't talked with him about it specifically, but I suspect he supports it. Why would I think that? Anyway, I talk about my mistakes in the hope of passing along what I learned from them. So let's see what autism can teach us about the myth of meritocracy. Literal English baron Michael Dunlop Young coined the term meritocracy in his 1958 dystopian satire, The Rise of the Meritocracy. The United Kingdom's tripartite education system at the time denied kids a full education if they scored poorly on a particular test. That essentially means using the discredited and racist science of IQ as a litmus test for determining who is allowed to pursue higher education and better jobs. Young intended the book to criticize that education system, so of course, most readers interpreted it as a ringing endorsement. Literally the opposite of what Young was saying, a theme that will continue throughout the rest of this soapbox.
If every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right.
But what I want to stress about that irony is that readers interpreted Young's criticism as an endorsement because that's what they wanted to hear. They already deeply believed in the myth of meritocracy. Young may have coined the word, but the idea is as old as the human species. You probably believe in meritocracy yourself without even realizing it. Now I'm telling you what you believe. I guess I should define what I'm talking about then, huh? So when I say meritocracy, I'm talking about a variety of beliefs that whatever happens to a person, good or bad, they're getting what they deserve. And practices stemming from that belief that reinforce the status quo by further advantaging people who already have plenty of advantages. For example, trickle-down economics cuts regulations on businesses and taxes on the wealthy, with the expectation that if you just let wealthy people do whatever the fuck they want, they'll do what's best for all of us. Because that's how monarchies and monopolies work. I talked about meritocracy in this video in the form of authoritarian personality, the belief that whoever has power must be correct in their decisions because they have power. And you can see that same authoritarian meritocracy when people say the invisible hand of the market ensures CEOs deserve thousands of times more salary compared to the workers who actually make the products. The invisible hand of the market is at least easy to believe. Other times meritocracy is just absurd. Watch the movie The Secret. It's like, you're in a coma? It's your fault. Believe harder. Meritocracy is also closely related to what Carol Dweck and her research calls fixed thinking. See the videos I made here about her work. The point here is the myth of meritocracy comes in a lot of different flavors and is known by a lot of different names. You might recognize meritocracy as the just world fallacy, neoliberalism, free market economics, victim blaming, the marketplace of ideas, colorblind politics, karma. Bitch at me in the comments about why your favorite phrase doesn't belong in this list. Toxic positivity, model minority, the party of personal responsibility. God helps God never gives you more than you can handle. When God closes a door, he opens a window. If you believe a lot of televangelists, Jesus is the king of meritocracy. Whatever the form, meritocracy is here to say that you as an individual will always receive whatever reward is appropriate for the skills you possess or the decisions you've made. You'll get the job you deserve, and the salary, and the spouse, and the house with the picket fence, and the 2.5 kids. It's that half kid you gotta watch out for. They're always the troublemaker. Meritocracy tells you that if you didn't get any one of those things, it's only because you're lazy and refuse to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And of course it's true. Why else would there be so many political comedians like Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert? Because everything being right and fair all the time? Now that's comedy gold! Hey Pop, I studied hard and I got straight A's on my report card. Wally, that's hilarious. Haha. Studied hard. That's right, everything is right and fair all the time. Like how Jeff Bezos pulled himself up by his parents' bootstraps, and with the genius idea of bookstore on the internet, now that he's retired, he gets to make over $200 million a day for doing abso-fucking-lutely nothing, and hires people to launch dick rockets into almost space, repeating 60-year-old NASA accomplishments at triple the expense. And what about those Amazon workers who didn't have the merit to think to open a bookstore? Well, they get what they deserve too, pissing in bottles because they're not given time to use the bathroom. I guess they should have pulled on those bootstraps. That's right, everything is right and fair all the time. There could never be, for example, a giant global corporation that chooses to deliberately injure the public for money as its business model and get away with it.
On Friday, a consortium of nearly 24 news outlets began publishing a series of stories, collectively called the Facebook Papers. The documents reveal how Facebook has been privately and meticulously tracking real-world harms exacerbated by its platforms, has ignored warnings from its employees about the risks of their design decisions, and exposed vulnerable communities to dangerous content.
The whistleblower is former Facebook product manager and Supergirl at Ann Taylor Loft, Frances Huygen.
And it fans hate, right? Anger and hate is the easiest way to grow on Facebook.
It's covered in misinformation. They set up an account belonging to a North Carolina mom, and within 3 weeks, she was recommended QAnon.
Do you believe your product can be addictive?
We certainly do not design the product in that way.
Facebook has realized that if they change the algorithm to be safer, people will spend less time on the site, they'll click on less ads, they'll make less money.
Never forget the day Trump rode down the escalator in 2015.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
And we, meaning Facebook, determined that it violated our policies, and yet we explicitly overrode the policy and didn't take the video down.
The research that we've seen is that using social apps to connect with other people can have positive mental health benefits and well-being benefits.
Facebook's own research says, as these young women begin to consume this eating disorder content, they get more and more depressed, and it actually makes them use the app more.
The Facebook monster doesn't just feed on your sadness, it also feasts on your rage.
It's easier to inspire people to anger than it is to other emotions.
Well, if the Facebook algorithm likes things that make you angry, it's gonna love the news about the Facebook algorithm.
We strengthened our enforcement against militias and conspiracy networks like QAnon to prevent them from using our platforms to organize violence or civil unrest.
But after the election, Facebook was used by some to organize the January 6th insurrection.
Facebook chooses profits over safety. Wait a minute! Did I hear that correctly? Are you telling me that a corporation chose money over the safety of consumers? That is so disturbing. I need to calm down with an ice-cold Four Loko. Hold on.
Well, shit. Maybe this meritocracy idea has a few holes.
still looking for a reason to hate us, and you're not open to learn or discuss, educate or admit you're ableist. Your hatred for us is kind of sus.
The point here isn't to make you feel bad or to make you feel superior to people who believe in meritocracy. I'm not like some conservative grifters who seem to think that pissing people off is a life skill.
What survival items would you bring to a deserted island? My hunting trophies, my rebel flag, and my MAGA hat. What? How are those survival tools? If you ain't owning the libs, you ain't living.
You know that you're doing something right when you're ticking those people off.
Also, I can't make you feel superior to people who believe in meritocracy because you believe in it. Meritocracy is a delusion that every man, woman, and agender heretic on this planet has, on more than one occasion, fallen prey to. For some people, it's racism when you hear people say shit like,
black people need to stop committing crime.
When we know that black people are arrested for drug possession almost 4 times as often as white people, despite using drugs at the same rate. Other people have fallen prey to the delusion of meritocracy by way of sexism, Islamophobia, or America's favorite pastime, contempt for the poor. It's a lot of bigotry, is what I'm saying. In my teens and 20s, I believed wholeheartedly in the free hand of the market. And isn't it comforting to know that even when you die, that hand is there, forcing funeral homes to compete for your grieving family's dollars by offering the best embalming caskets, flowers, and organ music at the lowest price. The form of meritocracy I'm focused on right now, however, is ableism. I need accommodations. No one should feel shame or guilt for saying this, but I do. I feel it because meritocracy has taught us all to view needing help as a moral failing. Americans have at least as much contempt for the disabled as we do for the poor. Admittedly, it could be worse. We at least have the Americans with Disabilities Act, whereas in Germany in the 1930s, disabled people were the first group of people targeted for extermination by the Nazis. Their claim was that anyone who wasn't an Übermensch was hurting the country by using limited resources, like food. And I can't help thinking that sounds eerily similar to conservative rhetoric still used today.
Part of the reason that Senator Manchin is concerned is because he worried some parents could use the child tax credit payments to buy drugs.
It takes me back to the Ronald Reagan days and when people used to use language like welfare queens to describe what's happening with single parents.
To be sure, most of America, and for that matter, the rest of the world, were sterilizing disabled undesirables in the 1930s. Eugenics was the viral TikTok of its day.
Hey, not a lot going on around here lately. Let's see what's behind this door. No, is there a better door around here maybe?
How easy is it for you to get radicalized? How easy is it for you to find some crazy content on TikTok? And she found out that's really not that hard at all.
We wanted to see whether being transphobic alone was enough to lead you to the far right. Obviously, TikTok didn't just give us neo-Nazi content immediately. I actually didn't get my first Nazi symbol until video 141. But the more I interacted with transphobic content, the more I was fed not only more transphobic content, but also homophobia and misogyny and racism and anti-Semitism. So I didn't actually have to interact with racist content to be fed white supremacist content. I just had to engage with transphobic content. What you see in this graph is the TikTok algorithm starting off with a normal feed, memes, recipe videos, whatever, and then going, oh, you're transphobic. Have you tried hating the gays? So a user could feasibly download the app at breakfast and be fed overtly white supremacist neo-Nazi content before lunch.
Supporting disabled people in society requires more than the bare minimum of, hey, what do you want from me? We're not doing the genocide. About 30 years ago, the Judge Rotenberg School in Boston decided they weren't inflicting enough pain on their often autistic residents. So they developed an electric shock device for the kids to wear called the Graduated electronic decelerator. They claim it stops self-harming behavior, and it causes burns on the skin. Oh yeah, replacing self-harm with other torture is totally better. And as is often the case, the US legal system is okey-dokey with torture. In this case, because some abled adults are annoyed by some disabled kids. That's this year in 2021. It's kind of weird we have so much contempt for people asking for accommodations because we give them constantly. We're just really inconsistent about it. Every time we add a content warning to media for discussions of torture or suicide, we're giving accommodations to strangers who may not even have a disability, just because it's nice to have a heads up that it might be difficult to watch. Meanwhile, even though we know autism is lifelong, I'm not allowed to get any help from Ohio's Department of Developmental Disabilities. Why? Well, I wasn't diagnosed before my 25th birthday. Not because I'm older. No. I definitely could still get help in my 40s. But I had to know about my disability that I definitely always have had and always will have about 7 years earlier.
Your test results came back. You're diabetic. Oh good, not a death sentence. What kind of medications do I need, Doc? Several, but I'm not allowed to prescribe them. We only treat diabetics when they're diagnosed before puberty. Hope you never need any amputations. Good luck with the black market and WebMD!
Of course, it's likely Ohio's Department of Developmental Disabilities wouldn't help me anyway. I've been turned away from a couple agencies for apparently not being fucked up enough to help. The rule of thumb for a lot of disability services is, hey, just get them a janitor job, bada bing, bada boom. So I say I was a veteran software engineer, and they say, why are you here? And then I say I'm here because I want help marketing dick jokes. And then we all laugh and I leave empty-handed. Is this a good time to talk about how I got 3 separate autism diagnoses? The first 2 were after I lost software engineering jobs in Portland in 2007 and Boston in 2008. And I know that sounds odd. I wasn't just running around looking for lots of second opinions. I didn't realize that the report from the first psychologist was an official diagnosis. And I saw a neurologist in Boston because I worried that it wouldn't be enough if I applied for disability. And I was right, because Texas made me see their psychologist just to try and prevent me from getting disability assistance.
Oh, a psychologist and a neurologist. You've done your homework. You won't mind if we check under the hood. Those other doctors, they graduated from prestigious universities, yes, but, well, they weren't Texans.
Yeehaw! By the way, my wife Tiffany has an obvious, measurable physical disability. She has x-rays from her doctor showing a vertebra in her back that was crushed many years ago. These days she can barely walk, much less lift things for a job. And she doesn't have any of what are called professional skills, like my software engineering. But the same government that denies her disability says I'm incurably crippled.
Get a job, you lazy sack of shit.
Okay, I fixed your computer.
Holy shit, is that how you talk to people? We gotta get you on the dole. Limit your exposure to the public.
I mostly don't experience ableism though. Well, that's not true, just I don't experience obvious ableism. Autism is what's called an invisible disability. So because I look normal-ish, I think even when I've told someone that I'm autistic, they assume that I'm not struggling. They think my autism just means I'm weird
or eccentric.
But if that were the case, then the state never would have approved my disability claim. And as it is, they worked hard to deny it. The criteria for an autism diagnosis in the first place also rule out just being eccentric. It requires significant social impairment. The 2 major indicators are an inability to get or keep jobs, or an inability to make or keep friends. And it's possible in some ways I might have been better off experiencing the overt ableism growing up. People always thought of me as smart. I barely studied in school and aced every test. And because teaching social skills isn't seen as valuable to capitalism, there aren't any classes for them. You're just supposed to know. My oldest daughter, Alex, was so mad when she discovered social studies meant history. She saw the name of the class and thought, awesome, I need that. She was so betrayed. So when I stumbled through my 20s unable to keep a job, nobody thought maybe I had a disability. They all just insisted that I was a royal fuck-up who didn't deserve a job. That once I got my shit together, I'd pull myself up by my bootstraps and the meritocracy would reward me plenty.
Where are my ADHD peeps at? I know you can, ooh, what's that?
Luckily, I stumbled into software engineering professionally despite lacking formal education, and was very good at it, becoming an Adobe community expert for several years with articles on the cover of the Cold Fusion Developers Journal. And while the salary and recognition were nice, they didn't really help. The myth of meritocracy hurts us all by demanding competition in all things. Even when cooperation isn't just better, but is literally necessary for survival. Like how the Walton family, who own Walmart, you know, the largest employer in half the US. Well, now they want to create water markets while the Colorado River dries up due to climate change.
Get ready. Yes. Yes.
Do not, my friends, become addicted to water. It will take hold of you, and you will resent its absence.
This demand for competition in all things stifles any attempt to help the victims of capitalism. We could easily end poverty, hunger, and homelessness. We have all the resources. The only reason we don't is because the meritocracy blames the victims. The meritocracy says people experiencing those things deserve to suffer.
They all have bootstraps, don't they? Tug on those fuckers.
I think the myth of meritocracy's victim blaming is hardest on people with invisible disabilities. As long as we're competing, we have to judge everyone by the same standard. While we can sometimes convince people that children don't deserve to starve because their parents are poor, a guy who looks like he should be able to work but has difficulty keeping jobs? Well, now he can't possibly be disabled. He doesn't need any help. We need to hold him to the same standard as everyone else. He's just a fuck-up who needs to get his shit together.
All hail the meritocracy!
I don't think that people with serious inheritable genetic disorders should be able to reproduce. I'm not taking this from a eugenicist perspective.
Well, that's good. That's a relief. It just sounded like eugenics, but...
Madeline is the pseudonym that is given to the woman who is experiencing what I have to call the eugenics project here in Canada. She's a disabled woman whose disability could be alleviated through medical treatment, which she is being denied. And so she is being given the choice, if you can call it that, between a slow and agonizing, paralyzing death, or to go through the medical assisted dying program that has just been erected here in Canada and allow a doctor to take her life.
Today I don't need a replacement. I'll tell them what the smile on my face meant. My heart going boom, boom, boom. Hey, I said, keep my things, they've come to take me home.
So if autism is invisible, what does it look like? Identifying autism is a little like herding cats because the most defining trait is that we don't conform to society very well. and there are zillions of ways to not conform. Most autistic people hate phone calls. My dad won't even answer the phone for me. Meanwhile, I just like text messages. Great, 3 minutes writing a text instead of a 20-second phone call. Yes, I'll get milk on the way home. I love you as well. Fist bump.
A lot of people think that the spectrum goes from more autistic to less autistic. Like, you know, low functioning, high functioning. It doesn't.
So a lot of people think that autism looks like this, going from mild to severe, when it actually looks more like this.
People don't really understand what on the spectrum means. So someone might say, oh, I'm on the mild end of the spectrum because I can drive, live alone, talk, dress myself.
Many other traits. Poor social skills, parallel play, anxiety, depression, your posture, the way you speak, eye contact, all that stuff. Everyone shows different levels to each different trait.
So for example, I'm verbal most of the time, so my support needs are pretty low in that area, so that might be all the way down here. But I have higher sensory needs, so that might be all the way up here. But someone might be nonverbal and need higher support needs in that area, but have really low sensory needs.
Some people will have both of these traits, but neither one is more autistic. Neither trait is more autistic. And obviously autistic people don't just have a single trait each. We all have so many different traits in so many different categories.
And what's tricky is where you're at in these sections can change over time and depending on your circumstances and how overstimulated you are.
These unique combinations of different traits can also become more or less pronounced depending on a variety of factors, including stress.
This is why it's more helpful to say levels of support needs rather than high or low functioning.
So it's just impossible to compare us, and there's no reason to, other than people really like to tell you how much you must not be suffering compared to this other person.
Just because you see that someone's doing okay doesn't mean they actually are okay. That's why high functioning and low functioning don't exist, and it's not a compliment.
Apparently I have what's called big brain autism. So the bad news is I have a difficult time finding hats. The good news is the Dayton International Airport gets to use my forehead as an emergency runway. It's good to feel needed.
Flight 69, you are nice and cleared to land on emergency runway 4-head Bravo. Watch out for those gnarly eyebrows. Over.
My peculiar skull shape underscores the point that, despite all the attendant anxiety and depression, autism isn't like a phobia that's caused by some external triggering event. Our brains are structurally different. Autism is physical in the same way that the paraplegia that keeps a person in a wheelchair is physical. And no, my big head isn't caused by mercury in vaccines. Mercury exposure in babies is known to have the opposite effect. It's called microcephaly, or shrunken heads. And no, my brain won't magically shrink down to normal size if I stop eating dairy and bread. It's physical. Suggesting a diet is like telling a paraplegic they can walk if they just eat a banana. In fact, despite a lot of snake oil, there are no medicines or therapies for any of the problems caused by autism. I say caused by autism, but for adults who don't seem autistic, they're really largely created by the myth of meritocracy. And if you're thinking, what about applied behavior analysis? I'll talk about why that's not actually therapy a little later. There is one still experimental therapy called
transcranial magnetic stimulation,
or TMS. For the low price of $10,000, I could read facial expressions and body language naturally the way you do. Maybe. Or I might just be out the 10 grand for nothing. There's no way to know. Damn, I'm glad American healthcare is a meritocratic market competition. How much is that kidney transplant really worth to you?
I've been doing this for about 15 years. There's only been one single, very small scale clinical trial that showed very small improvements.
Is there a way to tell which autistic children are more likely to respond to treatment?
No.
How much would it cost, for instance, for a 4 to 6 week treatment cycle?
Somewhere around $10,000.
And there is a potential downside is that I may modulate your brain in a way that may not be positive, that may actually lead to impairments or a greater symptom in a certain domain, because I'm not sure which way to modulate which part of the brain.
Even if, and that's a big if, TMS worked on my particular autism, it wouldn't give me better social skills. It would put me at square one, able to learn natural social skills with time, the way a toddler does, in my 40s. I should point out here that the idea of a cure for autism is controversial beyond the eugenics implications. There tends to be a split among autistic people. Younger autistic people often, though obviously not always, jump at the idea of a cure. But at my age, most of us are much more secure, more skeptical, and mostly reject the idea. I know what you're thinking. I just exude confidence and security. I should point out also that the idea of a cure is mostly pushed by groups like Autism Speaks, who don't include any autistic people on their board. It's part of a long meritocratic history of the powerful talking over the oppressed in just about any context. Probably the worst example of that being slave owners arguing that slavery was good for the slaves. I am different, and I have struggled because of it, and I can decide for myself if and how I want to change. It's also possible future versions of the DSM may move away from the impairment model and no longer define autism as a disorder the same way it no longer defines homosexuality as one. Queer folks, myself among them, another group of people that has historically suffered because we were different. But suffering because you're different doesn't necessarily mean your difference is a disease.
I am autism. I'm visible in your children, but if I can help it, I am invisible to you until it's too late. I know where you live, and guess what? I live there too. I work very quickly. I work faster than pediatric AIDS, cancer, and diabetes combined. And if you are happily married, I will make sure that your marriage fails. Your money will fall into my hands, and I will bankrupt you for my own self-gain. I don't sleep, so I make sure
These differences in autistic people start early, apparent in the youngest babies. Even before a kid can speak, they see something that interests them and point to it to share their excitement with others. An autistic kid will see something that excites them.
Even though the lady is talking to him, he shows no interest in her. He does not seem to understand that her gesture is an offer to help him.
A pediatrician or two told my mom to be grateful when she was worried because I didn't cry. Autistic people of any age often don't make eye contact or find it uncomfortable, but it's by no means all of us. It's not uncomfortable for me, but I often forget to do it. What? About my oldest daughter, Alex, a school psychologist who knew I had an autism diagnosis told me to my face while I was making eye contact with him.
She can't be autistic because she makes eye contact.
Alex made a conscious decision to learn to make eye contact because normies think it's rude when you don't. Neurotypicals, normies, is there a way I can describe you that won't piss you off? That's an actual question I asked myself while writing this. Going with normies. Autistic kids often have delayed speech and then start speaking in complete sentences. My oldest daughter Alex's first words were, "Go away, you are annoying me." Excuse me, I'm just so proud that she said my name. But we're talking about adults, and the state lumped me together with a bunch of other people and said there's some things we collectively can't do. So aside from keeping jobs or friends, what are those things? I don't have an inside voice. I can fake it for a few minutes, but my brain can't retain it for a whole conversation. Another thing I can't do is hear you call my name multiple times, 5 feet behind me.
Sam? 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 Sam?
What? That's called hyperfocus. My brain latches onto something, usually work-related, and whether I want it or not, it just shuts my ears off to keep them from distracting me. Something else I can't do is take dictation. Granted, that's mostly done by computers now, like Siri, Alexa, or Google Assistant. But you know how voice recognition makes a lot of mistakes?
Who sang the song Glitter in the Air?
Pink.
That answer is wrong. The correct answer is Pink.
I need medical assistance immediately.
I added medical assistance immediately to your shopping list. Who sang the song Bohemian Rhapsody?
Queen.
That answer is wrong. The correct answer is Queen.
How do you spell book?
It's spelled F-U-C-K.
Play ticker.
You want to hear a station for porn detected, porno ringtone, hot chick, amateur girl, quality sexy.
No.
Hot pussy anal dildo.
Yeah, my brain does that same thing all the time. It drives my wife Tiffany crazy because between that and the hyperfocus, she's constantly having to repeat herself for me. This is my friend Chris, and I love this screen name. There's intentionally no capital letter in the middle, so you can read it as either Stallion's Slaughter or Stallion's Laughter. And that basically sums up what conversations are like for me on a daily basis. It's kind of like your entire life being one long string of misheard song lyrics.
I got my first real six string. Beelzebub has a devil put aside for.
Everything we've hoped and dreamed for. Take the trophy home.
As you can hear the chants from the crowd. Let's go, Brandon.
Say that it's too late. Apologize.
Let's go, Brandon! It's like when a Southern woman says, "Oh, bless his heart." She doesn't mean bless his heart. You know, she means.
When you ask questions, they start banning. Hey, let's go, Brandon.
I mishear people a lot, which is common for autistic people. The reason my brain mishears things is the same reason I struggle with social skills in general. It's why I struggled to keep jobs or friends, how I got the autism diagnosis in the first place. Difficulty understanding or, more importantly, predicting you. I hear the wildest shit. Like this one time I thought I heard the president called Cardi B to talk to her about her cousin's friend's swollen testicles? Can you imagine that had been true? Like, oh my God. It was Nicki Minaj.
I joined a protest march in Amsterdam. There were some funny signs. This was my favorite one. The only baby that belongs behind bars. It was funny. I wanted my own sign. Let's just go with something positive. BOC, don't threaten me. This guy comes up and gets right in my face. He's like, why are you threatened by people of color? I'm not. Why would you think that? Your sign says people of color, don't threaten me. A valuable lesson in the importance of proper grammar. It's the difference between first-hand job experience and first-hand job experience.
These communication challenges are so alienating that the most popular online forum for autistic people is literally named Wrong Planet. I get why. I'm a Trekkie, and you know how people identify with characters that are sort of like them? You might identify with Captain Kirk or Picard, or maybe you're a Crusher or a LaForge. Like a lot of autistic people, I inevitably identify most with the characters that are the most alien. Data, Odo, 7 of 9, less so with Spock.
You'd make a splendid computer, Mr. Spock.
That is very kind of you, Captain.
A lot of people speculate about Barclay being autistic, and yet I much more identify with the characters that are literal aliens. But let me get all you Zoomer kids by referencing your favorite alien, Mork.
I am Mork from Mork. Nanu nanu.
I'm Mindy McConnell.
I like a being with a firm grivet. Shows character, at least evolution.
Well, thank you. How do you say thank you in your language?
We spit. My mission is to observe Earth, and the only way I can do that is by being one of you I face in the crowd, which is easy because I fit right in.
Not really. Mork, you and I have got to have a talk, so you might as well sit down and make yourself comfortable.
Don't mind if I do.
I think I identify with Mork so much because as a baby, instead of crawling, I would just plant my face directly on the floor and push hard with my legs, just dragging my face along the carpet while my arms dangled. Crawling is for pussies. Real babies get rug burn on their face. It builds character.
Lal, how are you?
I am functioning within normal. I am fine, thank you.
Good. Guinan, Lal needs to observe human behavior.
I'm sure you can spare a few minutes.
If it's any consolation, I share your discomfort with social gatherings.
They seem to occur with alarming frequency.
Mr. Neelix would argue that they improve morale.
I've been looking for ways to improve my social skills.
It was probably unwise of us to attempt to place a human colony in this area. Of course, there are 3004 other planets in this star cluster in which we could have colonized. The largest and closest...
Data, don't babble.
Babble, sir? I'm not aware that I ever babble, sir.
Do they accept our presence at this planet?
Undecided, sir.
Data, please feel free to volunteer any important information.
There's a man lying there dead, and you talk about stone spears. What about Latimer?
My concern for the dead will not bring him back to life.
The Edo want to execute my son. I will not allow that to happen, Jean-Luc.
Most interesting, sir. The emotion of motherhood as compared to all others felt by humans.
Shut up!
You were right, sir. I do tend to babble.
Are you happy?
I'm as much a part of the place as anyone else.
Oh, I doubt it. They tolerate you, but you're not one of them. Being what you are, you can pour your square shape into a round hole, but you don't really fit, do you?
Your presence is required. Rather, it is requested. Tonight, 1900 hours, holodeck 2.
Another engineering simulation?
Dinner.
Dinner?
The consumption of nutritional biomatter.
I watch them, and I can do the things they do, but I will never feel the emotions.
It is a limitation we must learn to accept, Law.
Then why do you still try to emulate humans? What purpose does it serve except to remind you that you are incomplete?
You don't much care for humanoids.
I know from experience, they don't much care for changelings.
I think you'll find the people here are different.
Oh?
They accepted me.
Have they?
There are still many human emotions I do not fully comprehend. Anger, hatred, revenge. But I am not mystified by the desire to be loved. Or the need for friendship.
Computer, set a course for the wormhole.
Course laid in.
Ready, engines? Home. Where is it? Someday we'll know. Cousin.
No one knows what it's like to be hated, to be faded, to telling only lies.
The world is chock full of unassuming signs that are vital and important-looking signs that don't mean shit. Similarly, normies hate hypocrisy while being giant fucking hypocrites. The same people who told me growing up that honesty is the best policy and harped on about The Boy Who Cried Wolf also told me that I needed to lie my ass off all the time, and that if I didn't lie my ass off all the time, I was a bad person.
You look great. You've got to meet the baby.
Her name is Lin Yao, which means beautiful jade treasure. She is. We have a video, of course. Would you like to see the video?
No, thank you. Where's the bathroom?
Down the hall, second right.
I'd love to see the video.
Speaking of lying, autistic people are statistically about the most brutally honest people on the planet. Yes, there are exceptions. But just like we tend to interpret other people too literally, like how we're great at reading sarcasm, we don't really speak in subtext, double meanings, or coded language, except in very specific cases when someone's told us explicitly how to do it. And we often struggle to understand when other people talk that way. Don't do this to us, for example. We hate this.
Hate this.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Hate this. Burn with the fire of 1,000 suns.
I'm sorry, don't let me interrupt.
As you wish.
Data,
Yes?
when your girlfriend arrives with a gift, stop whatever it is you're doing and give her your undivided attention.
I should not have resumed my painting.
No,
Despite your suggestion that I continue.
exactly.
Never call me at the source.
It's just a metaphor, dude.
His people are completely literal. Metaphors are gonna go over his head.
Nothing goes over my head. My reflexes are too fast. I would catch it.
Shoot the ball!
I can't lie. I'm not good at it.
He's an
Ichthyologist.
Mr. Franklin here doesn't think that Julie's fish, you know, the one that I showed you, could live longer than a year or two. What do you think?
I think it can. This is the North Korean marble fish.
North Korean.
Very strong fish. It's very tough fish. Would have to be to live in a country like North Korea.
Right.
No, I understand that. You're being very serious right now.
I can clearly see you winking.
Damn it. I'm using my left eye?
You really are the worst liar in the whole world.
Tried to tell you that.
Excuse me, is this Sarcasm 101?
No, it's Lamaze class from Men Named Arthur.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I'm kidding. It is Sarcasm 101. Be more gullible. Take any seat you want.
Thanks.
Except that one. I'm kidding. Sit down. Marissa has just learned what? Anyone? Anyone? Bueller?
Good sarcasm is hard to distinguish from normal speech.
Could you be more of a teacher's pet?
Tom, I heard that. Good one.
As a result of this lack of subtext, often autistic people are too honest for our own good. Usually because we don't know that we're supposed to lie or how we're supposed to lie. Sometimes we just don't know when to shut up or stay silent. A guy I know walked into a conversation midstream and just blurted out, "My dick is brown."
Oh, dude. You can't just say that. It's gonna get you in so much trouble.
It's not because he's a creep. He's autistic, and his parents homeschooled him, and he rarely left the house, which was a huge mistake. You take someone who struggles with social skills and you restrict their ability to practice, and the end result is he still hasn't learned many of the ways that adults censor themselves. So he still talks a bit like a 5-year-old? I don't really like saying that. It feels gross to me to say that about another person. But it's true, he has no clue what too much information is, and he's constantly asking obscure technical questions about the last thing he read on the internet to anyone within earshot. Why is it called the October Revolution? Is outer space the loneliest place? Would a city care if there were an animal serial killer? 3 more dead in Bowling Green killing spree. Police are seeking information about this gecko who's wanted for questioning in connection to the murders. I have a similar honesty problem that I'm horrible about movie spoilers. It drives Tiffany crazy, but it's not intentional. It's just very difficult for me to predict what other people think of as spoilers. So if you think that an autistic person is dropping hints instead of telling you what they think, or you think they're trying to gaslight or manipulate you, you're probably projecting. Sorry. And yet, recent experiments show that normies who are inveterate liars take one look at a brutally honest autistic person and brand us liars. That's cute. Also, nobody can tell when someone's lying by looking at them. Polygraphs take hours to administer and they don't work. And somehow your gut is going to do a better job after 3 minutes with a stranger? Why do you think you're a mind reader? Stop thinking you can read minds! Speaking of taking things too literally, I was on the way to a store to get some tape to help this other guy with a catheter he was wearing. We were alone on the sidewalk, so I told him that I was pretty sure that after a few days he could take the catheter out himself just like I did. So he looks at me and he points at his junk and he says, "Here?" "Yes, that's what I meant. Whip your dick out in front of the Dollar Tree. Maybe you'll get talent scouted for Catheter Sluts 3. Not for nothing, but that dropping hints thing is one of the most common complaints that autistic people have about normies.
Here are 10 things guys say versus what they actually mean. Number 1.
Hey, how do you know that guy?
Really means,
have you guys had sex before?
Hey guys. Hurry up. Next one. Next time. Next time.
Bless his heart.
Let's go, Brandon!
Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. Yeah, I'm barely managing to conceal my churning maelstrom of emotions.
I just need a man that can make me laugh. That's literally all I need. I just need a guy that can make me laugh. And maybe a guy that has a really good job. I'm thinking $250,000 a year.
It's like a secret code that only you and everybody else knows.
Hey, let's go, Brandon.
And he has to have a beard and abs. Oh, definitely abs. He has to go to the gym like every day.
You know, we should really start exercising.
Really means
you're starting to get a little bit out of shape, and I'm just throwing myself under the bus as well, so you won't take super offense to that.
It's subtlety done in a very loud way.
Hey, let's go, Brandon.
Once we get married, he won't be watching as much football.
Bless her heart.
You look so amazing in that dress.
Really means,
okay, can we go now? I've said you look good.
And it works everywhere.
They want you to help put America back where you found it and leave it the hell alone. Let's go, Brandon.
Had incredible potential. It was a shithole.
You guys have a wonderful Christmas as well, and let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon. I agree.
Bless his heart.
Difficulty hinting is the main reason that I rarely flirt, because I'm bad at it and I usually regret it. Remember that we identify with literal aliens when we're watching TV, so imagine for a moment that you're the first human on Mars and you discovered a hidden civilization of Martians there, and there's a severe language barrier, you learning Martian for the first time. How do you get on the Martians' good side? Reverse psychology! Offer to help them fix their backwards traditions. Huh?
I require advice.
Don't look at me. No, Data. I simply mean that I can't give you any advice here.
I make a better you than you.
You're going to give me a detailed account of everyone you cheated and exactly what you did with their property.
Why would I do that?
Tell her about your research, Mr. Tuvok.
I beg your pardon, Captain.
Tell her about the prisons.
Barely habitable. Torture is commonplace, as is disease, including several incurable forms of psoriasis.
I think she gets the general idea. Psoriasis?
Improvisation is not foremost among my talents.
I'm a big Marvel Comics fanboy. Love all the movies, despite the limitations of their messaging. And in the last decade or so, I can't watch just about any superhero movie without crying. I almost couldn't literally see Wonder Woman in theaters because I couldn't stop crying. Despite my anxiety nearly dropping me, my cancel culture video was well received. A few people seemed to think I was saying cancel culture is a hoax. But I was trying to make a much more nuanced comment about the way people use the term. And one point that may not have been clear is that I think if anyone has called to use the term cancel culture, it's autistic people. Because it's kind of our whole lives. It's literally in the diagnostic criteria for autism. And also, if you refuse to examine the context around something like a slur, for example, I guarantee you're also hurting autistic people by rushing to judgment because we're weird on a first impression. Like Elijah McClain, who was mistakenly reported as autistic after an unprompted assault by Colorado police killed him in 2019 because a neighbor reported him wearing a ski mask as suspicious because he was cold. There's a reason people say never judge a book by its cover, because the people who say it do it all the fucking time. Don't call the cops on someone because they're different. In fact, don't call the cops. In recent years, I've heard a lot about the high suicide rates for transgender teens, and the science is in. The one thing that helps prevent transgender teen suicide is supportive friends and family who accept their gender identity. Supportive friends! So that should be no trouble at all for autistic kids. That's why I cry at superhero movies, because one of the most prominent themes is that when things get really bad, there is always someone there to help. And throughout my life, that's been really rare.
Captain Sam, can you hear me? On your left.
If you've stuck with me this long, it should come as no surprise to you now that autistic people have 3 times the suicide rate of normies. And I wonder if, and bear with me here, this may be a real stretch, maybe a contributing factor in all of that difficulty keeping jobs and friends and the high suicide rates possibly could be a lifetime of normies repeatedly branding our brutal honesty as deceit? I guess we may never know. Editing Sam here to let you know it's even worse. After recording this segment, I was looking for source graphics and I stumbled across this article from Helio. Researchers know about what are called protective factors. For heart attacks, for example, if you exercise regularly, you're less likely to have a heart attack. And they've identified a number of protective factors for suicide, like being married. And it turns out that all these things that reduce a normie's risk of suicide are either much less effective or not effective at all at reducing risk for an autistic person. I know this video is already really long, but I felt like that was important. There's a common idea that autistic people prefer to just be alone and not have friends. Just make us all astronauts and send us to Mars because we like routine and repetition and obsessive interests and a complete lack of human contact. Are you describing astronauts or the Unabomber? My dad might dig it. He's said for years that he just doesn't get birthdays. Let me get this straight. You party with them, and you tell them you love them? What a strange custom. But for myself and a lot of autistics, we want jobs and friends. We did get a diagnosis, right? People hate me, doctor.
And how does this make you feel?
I feel awesome! Just wanted to let you know. See you next week.
Editing Sam here again. The academic sources I put on screen are meant kind of like footnotes in a book, to give extra detail if you pause to read them, and I try to also link them in the description. But I didn't want this point to fly by under your radar. I wanted to make sure you got it. Yes, you specifically, insert name here. Autistic people are disproportionately affected by 9 out of 21, or almost half, of the risk factors for suicide, and usually lack at least one of the 6 protective factors. And as I mentioned before, the protective factors are either less effective or ineffective for us. These are mostly the risk and protective factors in the category of supportive friends and family, which brings me to these studies I found in the journal Nature while researching an idea called the double empathy problem. These things are really dry to read, so I'm going to try something different. Imagine you're asked to participate in a science experiment. Nothing too exciting, just watching a collection of 10-second videos of random people talking about, say, movies they've recently watched. Small talk, basically. And after each video, you answer a few questions. Were they awkward? Do you think they have many friends? And here's a big one. Would you be willing to have a conversation with them? Around video 3, you're listening to a guy say, you know, I really enjoyed Thor Ragnarok. And you don't know why, but you respond to the questions, nah, this guy's a loser with no friends. I wouldn't be caught dead talking to them. I think most people would say they would never respond that way. And most people would be wrong, because the participants in this experiment consistently responded that way to any video of a person they didn't know was autistic. The researchers proved that this response wasn't because of anything the autistic people said, because they had a separate control group read transcripts of the videos, and those people responded, yeah, Thor was fun. Yes! Meaning that the reason for the reaction had to be down to things like facial expressions or prosody, which is a fancy way of saying the autistic people lack rhythm. Also, if they saw multiple videos of a normie, their feelings about that person improved. But with an autistic person, their first negative gut reaction stuck. In a very real sense, they're judging the book by its cover, and as the researchers point out, their unwillingness to read the book also leads to the book not getting opportunities to practice its social skills. I'm sorry, the metaphor got away with me. And it's not because they don't want to practice social skills. As the researchers also point out, autistic people are far more likely than normies to self-report loneliness and a desire for more friends. One of the things they recommend is that we teach normies to accept the awkward presentation of neurodiverse people, which seems to me like a tall order, because it's basically convincing the whole world that meritocracy is dumb. But you are watching this video right now, so I guess if you're willing to listen to me, then there's hope we can teach people to read autistic book people and not shrink away in horror at a glance at the cover. Moreover, at this point, I'm just talking about casual conversations. Imagine what a job interview must be like.
That hiring manager is not liking the handshake. And he's down. He's down. He couldn't last the whole 8 seconds.
There's a saying in rodeo, it's not if you get hurt, it's when and how bad.
So the next time you hear somebody whinging about cancel culture because somebody they like isn't on Twitter anymore, ask them how many autistic or generally neurodiverse people they hang out with on a regular basis. And one other quick question, I just want you to keep this in the back of your mind, it might come up later. Imagine an autistic person used a slur in a piece of art they created, and you felt this was problematic. Do you think that they are going to take your criticism seriously more if you are a friend to them and spend time with them and talk to them, or if you react like the people in this study? I wouldn't be caught dead talking to that friendless loser. They lack a rhythm.
I know a guy in Cincinnati hosting D&D with all autistic players because they all thought that they would never have a chance to play because of their difficulty making friends. What's worse, in our capitalist dystopian hellscape, friendship is declining among normies. But in Star Trek, the alien characters have and keep friends.
My apologies for saying that you babbled.
But I do, sir.
You also see things in a way we do not. I need help, my friend.
To be part of your life again. Your life here, on the station. From time to time, we could talk about things that mattered to you. I'd like that.
Closer. We've become more than colleagues. We're friends.
Friends, agreed.
These last few months have been the happiest of my life. But even so, part of me wishes that Laz and I were out there right now, searching for the others, existing as changelings. Because that's what I am.
Well, then maybe you're right. Maybe you do belong out there.
When one of my friends is distraught, I have learned that the thoughtful thing to do is to attempt to make him feel more comfortable. May I offer you some refreshment, Chief?
No, thank you, sir.
Would you like a pillow? Or a more comfortable chair to sit upon?
No, sir.
Perhaps you would like some music. Brahms, Aurelia.
You helped him escape.
I don't want you to stay here under some sense of obligation. I hope you find what you're looking for.
I went back for you. Because you are my friend.
Occasionally, people correctly diagnose the problem, like the backlash against the People app, advertised as Yelp for People, because that on-the-nose tagline made it so obvious that it would just be a convenient new way to reinforce the meritocracy by doing what they've always done, shitting on each other over various first-world problems and minor perceived slights. But people who correctly railed against Yelp for People or China's new social credit system mostly haven't noticed that this isn't new. And not just because recent leaks showed that Facebook was already yelping people to death. Ask any autistic person. These apps just make more convenient the bullshit unfounded rumors that we already dealt with. Mean girls used to whisper that shit to a friend over coffee. Now they yell it at strangers over the toilet. It may be new for you, for us the effect is the same. And if you think the problem started with, or is confined to, a smartphone app, how likely is it that you're taking steps to address it, rather than using Facebook to dunk on the People app next to a status about the weird guy in your office? A while back, I started introducing myself to people on Twitter and offering mutual aid because I realized in my 40s that if I wanted to help people, I could just tell them. But because capitalism and Facebook have alienated us so much, a lot of people are surprised and confused by a stranger offering help. So it's also become a way for me to deprogram myself from capitalist realism and an attempt to normalize giving and getting help. Something I think we should all do more of. Because as long as Facebook deliberately keeps us angry all the time to sell ads for wine and aromatherapy and giant tubs of ice cream, anything under the heading self-care. And if we keep making it harder to keep friendships, LGBT and autistic kids won't be the only ones with a big suicide problem. But more importantly, we're gonna run out of fudge ripple ice cream!
Father, what is the significance of laughter?
It is a human physiological response to humor.
Then, judging from their laughter, the children at school found my remarks humorous. So without understanding humor, I have somehow mastered it.
The children were not laughing with you. They were laughing at you.
Why would they wish to be unkind?
Because you are different. Differences sometimes scare people. I have learned that some of them use humor to hide their fear.
I do not wish to be different.
The struggle to fit in, to appear normal, leads most autistic people to do something called masking. This isn't unique to autism. It's something a lot of neurodivergent people do. And normies do it too, actually. You call it acting, with a few key differences. First, there's no character when masking, so there's no role to get into like with method acting. We're just trying to imitate the way normies walk and talk to try not to draw attention to ourselves. Sometimes we do things that don't even make sense to us just because you do them. Like small talk.
I understand that Arcaria has some very interesting weather patterns.
Mr. Data, you all right?
Yes, sir. I'm attempting to fill a silent moment with non-relevant conversation.
Small talk.
How did I do?
Perhaps it was a little too non-relevant.
Secondly, for normies, acting is a job. You rehearse and you perform, and then when the curtain falls, that's it. You're done. You no longer have the stress of work when you go out for drinks with friends or coworkers. I know that sounds obvious to you, right? But what you don't realize is that for us, the work never stops. If we go out for drinks with friends, we're still masking, so we're still working. We still have the work stress when we're out for drinks. We do that because of the very reasonable concern that if we let the mask slip, we might lose another job or a whole cluster of friends. And I know that probably also sounds to you like an overreaction, but it's not. This stuff really does happen to us all the time. That's why it's in the diagnostic criteria for autism. I've never met my older brother, Vincent. When my mom told me about him in my teens, she was sad that she'd given him up for adoption and she didn't get to see him grow up. And she talked about wanting to hire an investigator to find him and see how he was. Then a year or two ago, Vincent contacted our mom. We were both nervous and excited. Vincent's in his early 50s and his adopted parents recently died. And he was reaching out to our birth mother to see if they could develop a relationship because they had been most of his social circle. Vincent is more stereotypically autistic than I am, and so as much as I've struggled to make and keep friends, his struggles have been much harder in that regard. Mom had about 2 conversations with him on the phone, and then she stopped answering his phone calls. He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't offend her. He didn't make some racist remark. He was just awkward on the phone. That's our goddamn mother. So when we say we're anxious about a party or meeting someone and you trot out that same sage advice that you think is so goddamn amazing.
But remember, be yourself.
Fuck all the way off. You be yourself. I'm busy surviving.
She is also learning to supplement her innate android behavior with simulated human responses.
You want more eye contact from me, don't you?
No! No! Why don't you relax? Try not to be so tense. Take it easy. Smile. A smile, you know. Well, we'll work on that.
Be yourself? Never mind the logical absurdity of it, it can be an incredibly anxiety-provoking thing to hear as a teenager, or an adult for that matter. You know what my self was at that time? Scared as shit, lonely, anxious to the point of insomnia? Being that me was not an option. I didn't have the tools to deal with those parts. But if the me I was supposed to be being was something else, then yes, no shit, I'd love to be that. Do you have the rest of the instructions, jackass?
So let's start by exploring what different kinds of metaverse experiences could feel like. Starting with the most important experience of all.
He still hasn't learned to human. You have all the money in the world. You could have a team of people, like all these different linguists and coaches and stuff, but it's still just like, hi, welcome, grilling these meats, smoking meats like a brisket in the backyard. Yes, like you, fellow humans.
The Varolans never accepted me as one of them, and I was never really able to fully mimic their appearance.
Faces aren't easy.
No. And humanoids are not very tolerant of difference.
Kids were brought to Jesus, not of their own will or their own volition, but by their parents, that had epileptic fits, anger issues, outbursts of emotion. And because we've called it possession, parents refuse to deal with it. Are you telling me my kid's possessed? No, I'm telling you, your kid could be demonized and attacked, but your doctor calls it autism. Ain't no such diagnosis in the Bible!
I've been studying all available data relevant to the species, as you recommended.
Familiarizing yourself with their culture will help you adapt.
A main reason as to why girls are so late to get diagnosed is because we are particularly good at one thing that guys are not so good at when it comes to autism. And this is something we call masking. Masking is basically just being like a really good actor. It's where you take traits that everyone else is showing and start portraying them as yourself. It's like a lot of copying going on. But in your mind, you don't think you're copying, you think that this is normal and everyone feels the same way that you do. You basically feel like an alien and you're really good at hiding that. Which is why I don't seem autistic.
Look at me, Nerese. What do you see?
I see you.
No, this is just a form I borrowed.
Clever girl. All that effort that goes into the full-time job of acting, we have to keep up all day long, except when we are entirely alone. And for some of us, the constant pressure is so stressful that it results in literal injury. I want to show you a scene of a typical conversation, and I want you to see if you can spot the moment that this becomes a problem for the autistic person.
Hi, I'm Hyunwoo.
Hi, Megan.
Of course, masking isn't the same for all of us. My friend Willow, who helped with this script, says they just resigned themselves to be lonely rather than the constant grind of masking, because at least that way they know the few friends they have are genuine. I don't consciously mask as far as I'm aware. That doesn't mean I'm not putting a lot of effort into appearing normal. There are a number of things I do to appear more normal that I just don't think of as masking. I read a lot of books about anything I think might help me with my social skills. Seth Godin's Tribes, I don't remember much about. Amanda Palmer, The Art of Asking also wasn't very useful. I have to go through a lot of books that I ultimately don't find useful in order to find ones that are useful to me.
Yes, 50 scientifically proven ways to be persuasive. Pretty decent. It's kind of a grab bag of tricks. Nudge is about behavioral economics, not super useful for social skills. Emotions Revealed by Paul Ekman. This is about reading facial expressions, and while I don't really have a problem with prominent facial expressions, I was hoping that this book would give me a little more nuance about like the more subtle facial expressions that people make. The Charisma Myth. It's okay-ish. Crucial Conversations. I've been meaning to get around to the other book they have, Crucial Confrontations, which is about conflict resolution. Audience is a marketing book. I read a lot of marketing books. They're kind of dual purpose, both for like marketing my comic books and also there is some social skills information that can be gleaned out of them. presence. I just haven't had the time yet to actually read it.
There are a number of things I do to appear more normal that I just don't think of as masking. When I make these videos, just about every line gets several readings. Hey hooligan, welcome back! 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 Hey. And then I use the take I think reads the most natural or animated. So I'm not reading the lines like a cheap robot, a body snatcher, or a politician. If robot voice is your kink, however, might I suggest Lonerbox, 3 Arrows, and Sean? And although I don't like big parties, I try to go when I can because I need to connect to people. Most autistic people avoid parties because the noise is overwhelming and every conversation is one more opportunity to accidentally offend someone. My son Nick has so much anxiety about offending new people that when he broke his leg and moved in with his sister, he decided a 3-hour bus ride was better than asking his job for a transfer to a store down the street at Chipotle. I fight that social anxiety hard, despite my mistakes. I joined a Dungeons & Dragons group after Tiff and I moved to Dayton in 2014. Shortly after, one of the other players, a guy named Rob, got engaged. I hate weddings. I'm happy for the couple, but they're very uncomfortable for me. Dressing up, being in a church, talking to a lot of people that I barely know and have little in common with. But I was trying to show support for my new friends, and in another botched effort to seem normal, I said, send me an invite to Rob, who I'd barely known for a few months. The group chuckled, and although I couldn't know exactly what they were thinking, it seemed like they were laughing more with me than at me, so a few weeks later I was standing around in a ballroom in an uncomfortable suit, trying not to let on that I had been crying while waiting for the other guests to arrive, because I didn't know anyone and I didn't know how to talk to them.
I learned today that humans like to hold hands. It is a symbolic gesture of affection.
If I ever made you feel that you couldn't be yourself with me, I'm sorry. I want to know you. The way you really are.
But I'm autistic, right? Doesn't that mean I'm some kind of super genius?
Now, come on, Bones, what's the mystery? His brain is gone. It's been removed surgically.
Your student. It's a boy of 8.
Charlie's 7, actually.
Then he's tall for his age. He flicked ink at you today.
Is there ink on my face?
There are 2 drops on your ear, in fact.
The veins in the boy's left arm are popping.
He's breathing.
No, the chest is moving paradoxically. The left lung is in distress.
There she is. That's the one. What have you done with Spock's brain? What have you done?
I should be going now.
Because I said that thing about being sexually excited?
No. I just... Well, yeah.
I have this thing that makes it hard it's called Asperger's syndrome.
Oh.
Too experienced to react rashly, which is why the lady for whom you worked lent you that necklace. Oriental pearls, diamonds, a flawless ruby, hardly the gems of governors.
allows the air to get out. The water in the bottle stops the air from coming back in.
A homemade one-way valve. He's breathing. He saved his life.
My brain works differently from NT's.
We just want to talk to somebody about Spock's brain, that's all.
NTs?
Neurotypicals. Sometimes I can't understand them.
A remarkable example of a retrograde civilization. At the peak, advanced beyond any of our capabilities, and now operating at this primitive...
Especially when they mean something different from what they're actually saying.
You don't do that?
Most Aspies are really honest. Psychologists think it's a lack of imagination, but psychologists are mostly NTs. Albert Einstein, Thomas Jefferson, Mozart, they all had lots of imagination.
They had Asperger's?
Probably.
The ring has gone, but the lighter skin where it once sat suggests that you spent some time abroad wearing it proudly. That is, until you were informed of its true and rather modest worth, at which point you broke off the engagement and returned to England for better prospects. Doctor, perhaps?
I should have never reconnected his mouth. As I was saying, a fascinating cultural development of a kind which hasn't been seen in ages.
The idea that autistic people are somehow smarter is a common misconception, and I take issue with the whole concept of smarter. I think it's an outdated idea that unfortunately has its roots, as I said earlier, in the discredited and racist field of IQ science. You can see my thoughts on IQ in this other video here about Carol Dweck's mindset research, or watch this excellent Sean video about the bell curve. The long and the short of it is that while we autistic people do see the world differently, that's not the same thing as being more rational. Because we often have obsessive personal interests, we're much more likely to be savants, which a lot of people mistakenly think is a synonym for genius, but it actually just means a specialized skill. It's the only time I'm aware of that doctors and scientists officially describe being skilled as a syndrome. Basically, if we like doing something, we get good at it. And then doctors look at that thing and say, aha! He's good at a thing! This must be more evidence of his disorder! We have some advantages for specific tasks like long-term memory and visual puzzle solving, but we're still prone to 1,000 cognitive biases that everyone has, like Dunning-Kruger and confirmation bias. And just because my cranium is large enough to land a passenger airliner in a pinch doesn't mean I've filled it with anything that's useful to society. My head could just as easily be an encyclopedia of train statistics or line-by-line recitations of every episode of How It's Made.
The space pen can write in zero gravity, which is why astronauts have used it. It also writes underwater, in extreme heat or cold, or when held upside down. All this is possible due to the pen's ingenious design that keeps ink flowing toward the tip no matter what.
And to be fair, is an autistic guy's head full of trains really all that different than a normie frat bro's head full of football statistics?
Hey you, yeah, you. Do you know what kind of train this is? Huh? Train, do you know what kind of train this is? Well, do ya?
Of course. It's a magic train. We're going to the North Pole.
Ah, I know it's a magic train. Actually, it's a Baldwin 284 S3 class Berkshire-type steam locomotive. Built in 1931 as the Baldwin locomotive works. It weighs 456,100 pounds and has a tractive...
Are we really going to the North Pole?
To Sheldon, live long and prosper. Leonard Nimoy.
This bachelor is preparing for a blind date a matchmaker has set up for him.
So wait, this is your answer when women ask what are your passions?
That's what I'm passionate about, and I say tongue sweepers.
But I know you're passionate about other things, James.
But I start with tongue sweepers. It's a light.
He came into the restaurant. Sorry, the napkin's dirty. He wiped his mouth with it.
I possess the DNA of Leonard Nimoy?
It's called the final member,
And this is one of, if not my most favorite film I've ever watched. When asked why he started collecting, he says,
This started as a joke.
which is honestly king shit. That is so fucking funny. Why did you spend the better half of a century collecting and maintaining a museum full of dicks in jars? Because it's fucking funny, my dude. With the collection beginning to overtake his home, he decided in order to keep collecting, he would need to open a museum, which is exactly what he did.
Do you realize what this means? All I need is a healthy ovum and I can grow my own Leonard Nimoy.
They also allegedly have mermaid and elf dicks, but you can't see them, they're invisible.
But sure, autistic people are smarter. And that proves the meritocracy works. Because we all know how the wealthy and powerful elite, politicians, CEOs, they're all autistic scientists. It's all that losing jobs and friends that does it, I guess. You know what they say, it's lonely at the top.
My brain is a complete catalogue of all porn in the galaxy. It's mostly butt stuff.
You could have a steam train if you just lay down your tracks.
I was 32 when I got my autism diagnosis and started noticing a bunch of books from autistic authors with the same theme. Welcome into my autistic world. Honestly, my first impression of that trend was that it seemed pretty egotistical. Everybody knows somebody who's autistic, even if you don't know who that person is. I mean, you may not know you know an autistic person, but you know one, you know? If you aren't aware of any autistic people in your life, that just means the autistic people you know are either undiagnosed or they're in the closet about their autism. Still, we're only 1 or 2% of the population, so it seemed unreasonable to me to have a whole shelf full of books demanding that people learn about us like we're some kind of endangered bird species, rather than the way I was trying to finally figure out where I'd gone wrong fitting in. Diagnosis gave me a starting point to understand why the first 3 decades of my life had been so fucked up. Finally, I could pull myself up by my bootstraps and develop those social skills I lacked. 15 years later, my feeling on those books has softened because I still struggle a lot with social skills. Reading all these books, and this is just a small sample, wasn't a curiosity or a hobby. I read all those books to protect myself from the ways that society, and the people in it, had routinely injured me. I read all those books in the effort to fit in, and I still largely don't. But I don't seem autistic. I know because I hear that a lot. Also, I got my diagnosis at 32. Also, I can make eye contact and don't repeat everything I say like a broken robot.
How do you know this car?
Definitely know this car. It's 1949 Buick Roadmaster, straight 8, Fireball 8. Only 8,095 production models. Dad lets me drive slow on a driveway, but not on Monday. Definitely not on Monday.
Who's your dad?
Sanford Babbitt.
Who? Sanford Babbitt?
10961 Beechcrest Street, Cincinnati, Ohio.
That's my address. I mean, hey, I'm talking to you.
Penny, California.
Bruner, who is this guy?
Raymond is your brother.
Released in 1988, the movie Rain Man harmed autistic people for decades to come because it badly misrepresented us.
He's not crazy, he's not retarded, but he's here. Well, he's an autistic savant. I don't know what that means.
Well, some people like him used to be called idiot savants. They have certain deficiencies, certain abilities.
Yeah, but he's retarded.
Autistic. Actually, high functioning.
No, absolutely not. Labels for autism have evolved over the years, and people are moving away from the term high functioning. But at no time did it ever describe people like the character of Raymond, who can barely hold a conversation. Yes, there are some autistic people who present similarly to Raymond, but by no means is that a best case scenario for people with autism. Rain Man won 5 Oscars, including Best Picture. So the writers, Barry Morrow and Ronald Bass, could lie like motherfuckers about autistic people. The vast majority of autistic people look a lot more like me. We are computer programmers and scientists, but probably more often, we stock your groceries. That assumes, of course, that we've been able to get hired anywhere. Most employers refuse to hire us on the gut feeling that we're liars. Fuck capitalism, by the way. I understand that you mean well, that you intend "you don't seem autistic" as a compliment. What you don't realize, though, is that it's another expression of ableist meritocracy. It's sort of like the racism of describing a person of color as one of the good ones. If you don't look like Rain Man, well, then you must not be struggling. You must be fine. In fact, if you don't look like Rain Man, you must be a genius!
I was once like you. Huh? I spent months in a lab being prodded and poked by a scientist who didn't recognize I was a life form. He never talked to me. It didn't occur to him. I didn't know what I was or what I was supposed to do. I was lost, alone. But it's not going to be that way with you.
While the message of this soapbox is how meritocracy and invisible disabilities combine to form the vicious, unholy Voltron of invisible ableism, I'll come clean that this was inspired by a personal experience. Okay, it was inspired by a lot of personal experiences, like all the times that I got fired from jobs, but one recent personal experience in particular. The hope is that seeing this will help some people better support their friends with invisible disabilities. I need accommodations, and being autistic, I really want to give you a detailed list of the specific things that you can do to support autistic people generally, not just me specifically. But I can't, not really. I've given you a little primer on some of the common problems of autism, but of course, we're all still different. And that is, of course, to say nothing of other invisible disabilities like ADHD or bipolar, or my friend Leslie who has Non-24 and makes a lot of really good videos about disability rights. My voice seems to be going as I'm recording, sorry about that. The only specific things I can ask you to do for autistic people are: A, don't drop hints at us. Tell us what you need. Trust me, you're not being rude. And B, don't expect us to drop hints, use coded language, or lie. If for some reason you still think I'm being cryptic, you can ask me. The answer is probably no, but I will give you an answer to that question. And if you think I'm being rude, you can tell me that too. I generally would prefer it, actually. It's usually unintentional. I'm almost always looking for ways to avoid that. These are generally good rules for supporting autistic friends, but of course, we are all different, so check in with your autistic friends for their specific needs. For example, a lot of autistic people have more problems than I do with crowds or loud noises. And although I personally like hugs, I regret foisting them on my daughter Callie when she was younger. She doesn't like being touched, and I, at the time, thought that I was helping her adapt to society. Good goal, bad method. My one final ask is this. Because we know that you normies are prone to misinterpret us, and we, for the most part, are already doing the best we can with our crippled social skills, I would appreciate some patience and reading our comments with a little more charity than you normally might. Literally, treat me like a crash-landed alien learning to communicate. And to drive home why, I'm going to tell you the mostly true story of Chuck and Larry. Despite my spoiler problem, those are fake names, and I'm taking a few liberties with the story because I'm trying not to identify the real people involved. Because I'm not trying to get back at them, I'm just trying to help you understand the problem, because some variation of this has happened to me many times, And I'm sure if you ask any other autistic person, they could give you lots of other similar stories. Hey Larry, I didn't script this part because I hadn't originally intended to address you directly at all, because the larger video isn't for you individually. But a couple of my friends expressed concerns about possible retaliation, so I decided to add this during editing. I do not believe that you are a bad or immoral person. I do not believe that you set out at the beginning of this story with the intention of hurting me. The intent in that statement is what differentiates it from an attack. I was not attacking you when I described my experiences because I was not saying that you caused them intentionally. I hope that if you do watch this, you're able to learn something from it. I hope a lot of people watching this are able to learn something from it, you included. That said, I am aware that the rest of this video is going to be uncomfortable for you. And I would say I'm sorry because, and I know this is going to be hard for you to believe, I do not like having to say things that make people uncomfortable, especially friends or people who have power over me. I hope you do watch, and as uncomfortable as I know it's going to be, I hope you get some growth out of it. But also, all the evidence you've given me so far suggests that you would never accept any apology from me for any reason, no matter how genuine, and would instead continue to maintain your laser fucking focus on figuring out how to turn every fucking word out of my mouth into something you can accuse me of. I'm pretty sure you already heard me say how I cry at Marvel movies and declared that a hateful anti-Semitic screed against the legacy of Stan Lee. And this is kudos to you, because this is the first time I have ever said this to another human being in my life. You broke my trust so badly that I cannot believe that you have any intention of treating me with any good faith. And so that being the case, I no longer have any rational reason to continue to, as I have many times up to this point, attempt to tap dance around your apparently amazingly fucking fragile ego. And it didn't have to be this way. You had ample opportunity to change the tone of this video. I asked you politely, months ago, to have one conversation with me in which you attempt to put yourself in my shoes. And you refused. You ignored me. Anyway, now you know it's honey badgers from here on out.
No one knows how to say that they're sorry. And don't worry, I'm not telling lies, but my dreams, they aren't as empty as my conscience seems to bear.
Last year, I was silently banned from an online group for disabled people. The irony. A friend told me after the fact the reasons given to the group, but not to me. A group moderator named Chuck, who I had never spoken to, didn't like the first minute of this video. And also I'd asked for some feedback on a script that included a joke he didn't like. Something in the vein of this tweet from Chris Titus. Brief side note here that most people, probably including you, don't bat an eye at the most horrible rape jokes imaginable, as long as it's in a prison context. When I realized that, like most people, I had become inured to hearing them, I stopped telling "don't drop the soap" jokes, because nobody deserves that. But apparently it's beyond the pale to say the name Ghislaine Maxwell was on the nose.
Epstein was recently arrested and accused of sex trafficking of minors. Back in the 1970s, He taught at the elite private school Dalton, where he's known for violating norms in his encounters with girls and wandering the halls in a fur coat, gold chains, and an open shirt that exposed his chest. What did he teach? Intro to pimping?
Everybody, except leadership in the Catholic Church, wants to protect children from sexual predators.
You in the chat now are saying that I'm in the pocket of big jizz. That could be the case.
No circle of rich and creepy men is complete without Donald Trump. That's right. Epstein, Clinton, Dershowitz, Trump. We've achieved full Mount Touchmore.
Now the question is on her first name more than anything, which is of French origin. And in French it can be pronounced either Ghislaine or Ghislaine. Ghislaine.
Ghislaine. Anyway, the moderator Chuck decided on the basis of those two things that I was an irredeemable shitbag who didn't deserve any discussion or warning before banning me from the disability group. Hot take. Denying people access to support on the basis of vague impressions without establishing the violation of any rules and without so much as even talking to them is bad. Also, not by a long stretch is this the first time normies have done something like this to me. Just now I have research that backs me up. It doesn't help, but at least I know I'm not imagining it. Oh, it's your fault for not fitting in. Shut the fuck up. Again, this is basically written into the diagnostic criteria for autism. A few months pass and I'm talking to Chuck in another online group where he can't ban me because he's not an admin. And I don't think Chuck knows that I know he's the one that banned me. So I'm on edge because of the concern that I'm gonna lose another group of friends. And I'm trying not to make a big stink about it, and when I can, I'm trying to be friendly to Chuck, to show him that I can be a good friend if given a chance. Passively, you know, I'm not going out of my way to contact Chuck. I'm just responding to him occasionally in group chats in a supportive way. Chuck, despite banning me from the disability group, is responding to me in a relatively friendly tone. I mean, what do I know about friendly? I'm autistic, but he's not cold shouldering me, he's responding directly to me, and seems to be trying at least not to display open hostility toward me in the group. In one particular direct reply to me, Chuck makes some comments that are unambiguously slander, full stop. This is a little bit, what's the term? Extremely fucking dangerous to autistic people. So obviously it's a huge concern for me specifically, especially given that Chuck had recently banned me from the disability group over similar bullshit. And since normies tend to label our brutal honesty as deceit, autistic people often don't have the skill or the ability to defend ourselves from slander. In groups, people are usually more than willing to gang up on the one autistic guy because he talks funny.
Hey, that weird guy is weird. He must be the one stealing office supplies, because, you know, he's weird.
And then when he denies stealing the office supplies, all the fucking liars in the office call the autistic guy a liar. Books, covers.
Yo, what's up with these shoes, bro? Nice outfit. If you're gonna be a clown, at least you can be a good one. You know that, right? Hey!
Come on, this guy's weak. Can't do nothing. The guy said you disappeared. Never even returned his sign.
Because I got jumped. Didn't you hear?
For a sign. This bullshit. It doesn't even make sense. Just give him his sign back. He's going out of business, for God's sake, Arthur.
Why would I keep his sign?
How the fuck do I know? Why does anybody do anything?
So I'm struggling with some serious issues, and I decided it wouldn't be good for me to air those concerns in front of the group. Because even though Chuck has already injured me, I'm trying to be nice and give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm not trying to corner or embarrass him in front of the group. I'm not a debate bro. Looking at you, Vosh. I know you're also autistic, but stop calling black activists fascists. When you say to a black activist, you're using the same rhetoric as white supremacists, Regardless of what you mean by it, it reads as equivocating the terms black power and white power. Maybe wait until black people hold all the positions of institutional power and then bring it? People are pretty okay with us pointing out that today's Israeli state is fascist because they're the ones in power. But trade unionists calling Jews genocidal in 1930s Germany was Joseph Goebbels' wet dream. Sorry, I didn't mean to just the tip on Goebbels there. Ugh.
It occurred to me while editing that this famous Saturday Night Live sketch with Eddie Murphy actually does a better job of making this point for me.
This next group should be popular with you young people. So let's have a big hand for Tyrone Green and his reggae band.
Kill the white people. Oh, we gonna make them hurt. Kill the white people. Yeah. But buy my record first.
A couple of my friends also said to expect shit in my comments if I criticize Vosh like that, but it's cool. Vosh and I are both members of the Autistics Eat Shit All the Time Club, so...
You just don't know when to give up, do you?
I can do this all day. My ball and my other ball and my penis.
Anyway, I'm still trying to be respectful to Chuck, so I message him privately to express my concerns about the slander, and I don't even mention anything about him banning me from the disability group. 2 weeks later, it turns out instead of attempting a single conversation with me, or even ignoring me or just telling me to piss off, Chuck found someone with power over me. Like we're in high school and he's getting the teacher because he's annoyed that I sat next to him. Chuck, if you're watching and you think that description is inaccurate or unfair, I have good news. Because the very low bar for having a say in what I think about your actions toward me is talking to me like a fucking adult. Like I do when I swallow my crippling social anxiety every fucking day. Ooh, Chuck, you know what you could do? You could use some of those conflict resolution skills you were bragging about in the group.
Flames on the side of my face.
So now I get a private message from Larry, who's a moderator in the new group, telling me not to privately message Chuck again. I'm already having huge concerns about slander and possibly guilt by association, which aren't in any way being addressed. And so I'm panicking. So I tell Larry the story about Chuck banning me from the disability group over first impressions bullshit, and that I've just been trying to be nice to him and show him that I'm not a villain, and that I was expressing my concerns to Chuck privately about the slander so as not to be a dick about it to him in public. Larry gives 0 fucks. He's annoyed by the private message I sent to Chuck being wordy. And his primary concern is that by even trying to be nice to Chuck in group chats, which Chuck was receptive to, I've somehow violated a boundary that was never communicated.
My dick is brown.
God. Wait, I've talked to you about this. Come on, man. So, to recap, I've told Larry that I'm trying to be nice and protect myself from a known threat. And Larry's immediate first response is...
What a fucking asshole! I gotta put this little shit in its place.
Okay then. At this point, I'm in a full-blown panic attack. This is a common problem for autistic people. It is extremely difficult, if it's possible at all, to maintain book-learned social skills while you're in the middle of extreme fight or flight. Okay, you're breathing heavy, your hands are shaking, and your pulse is like a freight train. Quick! What did you learn on page 47 of Crucial Conversations? It's a bit like putting a gun to someone's head and demanding they recite the alphabet backward.
No mistakes! Z! Chop chop, motherfucker! Y! Clock's ticking!
I agreed to not privately message Chuck, but was still talking to Larry in private messages for another hour or so, I'm not entirely sure, while having this panic attack. For the next 3 days, I can't sleep for more than about 2 or 3 hours at a time because I'm having PTSD flashbacks to this conversation with Larry and its relationship to other times that people have been unwilling to give consideration to my concerns. Like, specifically, the time that Chuck banned me from the disability group without even talking to me. And in the wee hours of the morning, while the intrusive thoughts are keeping me from sleeping, I make another mistake that, unfortunately, minorly inconveniences Chuck for a few hours. So Larry sends me another private message, and right out of the gate this time, he's like, "You did this intentionally to get revenge!" Because trying to be nice to someone who's already hurt you is a sure sign of revenge-seeking behavior.
"And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and
edible arrangements.
Those who attempt to poison and destroy my brothers."
I explained it was a mistake, and I put a great deal of effort into an apology, trying to make sure, trying to tiptoe around his feelings about this situation, to be as sure as I possibly could that I was explaining myself clearly and that he couldn't possibly misunderstand. And the apology was ignored, or, well, at least it wasn't acknowledged. I didn't hear anything about it, so I didn't have any real way to know how it was received. For several days, I make numerous, desperate attempts to de-escalate with Larry. And each time, Larry becomes increasingly hostile, including repeatedly accusing me of refusing Chuck's request to not privately message him, which I never did. Larry also tells me at least 2 or 3 times that raising concerns about slander was rude, and therefore I shouldn't raise those concerns ever. Not to Chuck, who had already injured me that way, not to anyone in the group, period. It's rude, is it, Larry? I'm sorry, uncollegiate. What would you call denying someone access to a support group without even talking to them on the basis of a fucking feeling? Larry even said to me, verbatim, "You should have known this person was a piece of shit after 5 minutes." Oh, fantastic! A group moderator who already knows that Chuck injured me with it, giving a full-throated endorsement of the kind of normie slander that harms autistic people all over the world on a daily basis. What's not to love? And you have the gall to bitch at me about not valuing your work as a group moderator, Larry? Larry? You're making the group unsafe for me, Larry! Gee, I wonder why I might not value someone putting me in danger, Larry! So after several days of trying to de-escalate with Larry, I finally hear from him that he decided not only was my apology not an apology, but it was in fact a malicious personal attack against him. So I asked Larry to consider a more charitable reading of my apology, given that I'm autistic. And Larry told me that I'm using my autism as an excuse to be a deliberate asshole. It isn't even within the realm of possibility that I, as an autistic person, might communicate a little differently, as autistic people do.
Fun will now commence.
No. None of that misunderstanding bullshit. Larry is incapable of misunderstanding because Larry is an infallible fucking mind reader. So the only possible explanation is that I actually had malicious intent and am performing some kind of absurd reverse psychology kung fu. But Larry's not entirely heartless. He does offer me some advice. He says that when he came to me and asked me not to privately message Chuck anymore, and completely ignored all of my concerns about possibly being falsely accused of things, which, as I've mentioned before, the only thing the average person needs me to do to accuse me of being a pathological liar is exist. So Larry's advice is that instead of having the panic attack about my concerns being ignored in favor of me being accused of being abusive for raising said concerns, is that I should just not have the panic attack. Oh, not panic attacks. Why didn't I think of that? It would have been so much easier. I should remember that next time. Then Larry vehemently made sure that I knew in no uncertain terms that his anger was mostly because he thought my concerns were stupid and a waste of his time. And then he stopped talking to me, and despite my last message to him being another attempt to de-escalate, he has not contacted me in several months. And every day I wonder whether today is the day that Larry or Chuck accuse me of something else that gets me banned from this group, just like Chuck banned me from the disability group before, and causes all the other members to stop talking to me. I think it should be obvious I'm not doing all this for revenge. A revenge seeker wouldn't spend months putting together a video essay about ableism and invisible disabilities and share the story anonymously in that context. A revenge seeker would send an edible arrangement.
Hey, I made us a cake! What a stand-up thing to do. You really are a sweetheart of a guy. Let's hear it for Tom, for he's a jolly good fellow.
I tell this story to remind you to read your autistic friends' comments with a little more charity than you normally might, to help and support them, and to not fall into the meritocratic trap of thinking they just need to grab them bootstraps and learn better social skills. Here I am in the situation where my social skills that the US government begrudgingly agreed are literally crippled netted me 2 counts of "you did these hurtful things to us and we are accepting no other explanation than you are a malicious, revenge-seeking asshole." And the only way out of that scenario is for me to suddenly, magically become a supreme expert at social skills, the literal disability that caused the problem in the first place. I need accommodations. And in this case, the only accommodation I'm asking for is for you to believe a single goddamn word out of my mouth! I'm not reading Emotions Revealed because I'm just fascinated about the science of facial expressions. I'm reading these things because I'm hoping that someday I might not have these semi-annual, weeks-long sleepless crying fits because of a goddamn miscommunication. I need accommodations. I've known I was autistic for 15 years. If I could just learn better social skills, I would have done it by now.
My dick is brown.
God damn it! Now? Really?
And you always seem outnumbered. You don't dare make a stand. Make your stand. Here I am on the road again.
While writing this, I came across this video, debunking the autistic terrorist myth. I recommend you go watch that rather than repeating Ellie here. She's already done excellent work, so The story about my apology being deemed a personal attack is kind of like the way that people blame violent crime on mental illness, or how TERFs accuse transgender women of being sexual predators. But the research shows that people with mental illness are far more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators of it. And transgender women are far more likely to be victims of sexual assault. That same theme carries through for autistic people and psychological manipulation or abuse. Autistic people are extra susceptible to and far more likely to be victims of abuse and manipulation.
Wait, you're talking about that dude who takes things too literally and frequently struggles to understand your sarcasm and coded language? Yeah, he's definitely trying to manipulate you with his shitty social skills.
Manipulation in close relationships is something that comes up time and time again for autistic people. It's not always obvious when it's happening, and it can be very hard to identify and avoid. Since I wasn't diagnosed back then, it was much harder for me to understand why these situations kept cropping up, and I often didn't realize when they did, and I just didn't know how to protect myself adequately against it. It's defined as to control or influence a person or situation cleverly or unscrupulously. It's important to note that the textbook definition highlights a person's specific intent to exploit, control, or influence via dishonesty, unfairness, or lack of morals. This is relevant in the context of autistic people often being accused of manipulation. That's not to say it doesn't or can't happen. However, we'll talk a little bit more later about why it may seem like autistic and neurodivergent people are controlling or manipulating when actually it's not intentional or even realized on their part. Exploiting norms. Exploiting the norms and expectations of reciprocity is one of the most common forms of manipulation. This is one reason why autistic people are more vulnerable to this type of treatment. It's easier to manipulate someone who doesn't have a firm understanding of what society considers normal and expected in a given situation. For example, a salesperson may make it seem like they are giving you a deal in order to pressure you to buy their product. I just want to point out that both of these tactics are explicitly promoted by society. Ever read a business book? Number 5, they make you feel guilty for voicing concerns. If you ask questions, scrutinize or point out errors or make suggestions, the manipulator may respond in an aggressive manner or try to draw you into an argument. By making you feel guilty for expressing your concerns in the first place, they then use this to control your choices and influence your decisions. Why autistics are more vulnerable to being manipulated? There are several autistic traits which make us more vulnerable to manipulative strategies: honesty, being more trusting, the inability to predict others' motives or consequences. Personally, I've been caught out by my stream of consciousness talking style, answering direct questions with honest answers without stopping to think, why are they asking me this? My general belief that no one would have a reason to manipulate me, and manipulators may be drawn to this. They may be drawn to us because, let's face it, we are kind of easy targets. We want to be accepted and liked, not isolated. We often don't understand why someone would lie about something. Autistic people can be over-empathetic and too forgiving.
I mentioned the Judge Rotenberg Center earlier, where mostly autistic residents are given painful electric shocks that burn their skin. This is part of a broader mental health industry practice called applied behavioral analysis that's used almost exclusively as a treatment for autistic kids. If they're not doing what you want, just hurt them. Slap them if they don't make eye contact. If you do this as a parent at home, it rightfully is called child abuse. If you do it to another adult, it's called assault. The UN defines it as torture, and yet somehow, at the Judge Rotenberg School, it's called therapy. And the US Supreme Court endorses that. So it's not just a case of one person abusing another, which is obviously bad enough, but there's an entire system of legal apparatus that endorses and supports the abuse of autistic people just because we're different. And that keeps us on the losing side of the meritocracy's required competition. Moreover, ABA only works if your goal is to terrorize children so they're scared to disobey you, not helping them learn how to navigate the world in a way that's good for them.
They also use extreme and torturous forms of punishment, such as prolonged restraint, food deprivation, and electric skin shock, to cause severe pain in order to punish undesired behaviors in actual children and adults. These behaviors can be as minor as standing up out of a chair without permission, or as was in my case, waving my hands in front of my face, tensing parts of my body, talking without permission, or even crying. For 7 years, all I wanted to do was escape this hell. I had been at JRC about 6 years at the time of my first escape attempt. I remember they had taken away my home visits, and home visits were like the only thing I was living for. At the beginning of the summer, they decided that I was going home too much and that I was running wild at home. Those were the actual words they used, running wild. They also said that I wasn't following the rules at home because they had set forth their own list of rules that I had to follow while I was at home. And my mom didn't really enforce those rules because I was a grown adult. Now you might ask, Jennifer, why didn't you just leave that place? Or why didn't your mom sign you out of that place? I was no longer in control of where I stayed, and my mom wasn't either. They had a court-ordered guardian who had signed me into JRC.
Reconsider donating to the Salvation Army because they hate gay people. That video is still getting comments today from people saying things like, oh, the Salvation Army helped me, to which I say, congratulations for not being noticeably gay and or not interacting with the leadership of the Salvation Army, who send people to conversion camps, support anti-gay legislation, and say gay people should be put to death.
There are states where if you get into bed with a trans person for something like a one-night stand, and it is the first time you guys are doing something, and they take off their pants, and you see something you didn't expect there, and you attack them violently, in a court, you actually have a legal defense. We used to have the gay panic defense. There's also now it's the trans panic defense. They're functionally the same thing. Your lawyer basically argues that you had a state of momentary psychosis, and therefore you are less responsible for your actions. Yeah, it's gross. And behind Ellie's cat head here, I have the list of states that do not allow the defense.
A cage structure built to contain an autistic Canberra school student. Dude, you can't just put the autistic kids in cages. What's happening? You can't do that. They don't want to call it the cage. They want to call it the structure. I feel like that's even worse. Sorry, little autistic boy. It's time for the structure.
Dr. Bashir. Dr. Bashir will not understand any of this. He'll put you in a high-security prison or quarantine you on a deserted asteroid in the Gamma Quadrant. Oh no, they'll put you in a zoo.
I want to see what the autism cage look like. You can't just... Wow, it's even worse than I expected. You can't do this. I will note the government did step in and people lost their jobs over this. That's great. I just want to know what's going through the people's minds in the first place.
It is true that many of the kids subjected to ABA adapt by masking, but as I've said before, that's also harmful to them. But once a kid is masking, they don't seem autistic, or at least they seem less autistic. That's why there are such heated arguments between the adult survivors of ABA and the parents of autistic children who think it fixed their kids. ABA is, by the way, the same practice that became gay conversion therapy. You know, that other therapy that also doesn't work and hurts people for no reason. Yet another in a long line of harmful medical practices that needs to end, just like lobotomy or leeching. I was lucky my parents never enrolled me in any ABA programs. Maybe they didn't think my behavior was frustrating enough, but that doesn't mean I don't need accommodations. And maybe if I dodged the ABA bullet, in some ways I might get more accommodations if I seemed autistic. Here's a clip of a more stereotypically autistic guy.
My name is Sam Waldron. I am the best man. I am the best man to the best brother that I could have ever asked for. My brother, Jonah, has been there for me my whole life. He is my best friend. He is my hero. I'm so honored to stand here as your best man, Jonah and Maddie. but I am also terrified. You see, I have autism. My autism can make me terribly scared to interact with people, let alone give a speech in front of 170 of them, for Pete's sake.
What do you think the odds are that you would tell him that an apology he gave you was not actually an apology and was in fact a malicious personal attack? That he was somehow trying to use this apology to manipulate you? Some years ago, my sister suggested that I try reverse masking. Invent some artificial stimming behaviors like rocking or hand flapping to remind people that I'm different. And I probably could do that, except that then I'd just be trading in the invisible ableism of you don't seem autistic for the overt ableism of people infantilizing me all the time. Telling me not to make dick jokes because they think I have the mind of a 5-year-old. Never mind that I have 3 children. I didn't quite understand inspiration porn the first time I saw Stella Young's TED Talk. Not like, damn, that's an impressive blowjob. I'm inspired. Hashtag goals. No, this video is inspiration porn. Not the video itself, the context in which it was shared. That kind of ableism is implied by the fact that news outlets shared this. When was the last time you saw a generic best man speech in the news? They only run his speech as a story because they think he shouldn't be able to do that. They think he should be too dumb or impaired to do normal things like a best man speech. But there's literally absolutely no reason to believe that he couldn't also be a software engineer like me. And also, and I think this may be the harder idea for a lot of people to really wrap their heads around and understand the implications of, there's no reason to believe that I'm not also dealing with many of the same struggles that he faces. It's the myth of meritocracy yet again. You're either Rain Man or you're a genius. There is no in between or treating people as individuals. Remember, as I said before, I've been turned away from a couple of different support agencies for apparently not being fucked up enough to help. Because that in between is where we often don't get the accommodations we need. Because we don't seem autistic.
You know I'd like to believe this nervousness won't pass. All the stones that I throw on building on the wall. I have become cumbersome unto this world.
I am, of course, not saying that autistic people are always innocent or that anyone is entitled to your time or friendship just because we're not deliberately abusive. Frankly, I understand why normies want us to conform. I am autistic, and I find many autistic people abrasive. Is that any different than normies? And beyond clashing personalities, I've talked to a bunch of autistic people who seem to interpret their own diagnosis as meaning that they are in fact super geniuses who are always correct while everyone else is always wrong. Is that any different than normies? At least 3 separate autistic people told me that their autism gave them literal mind-reading superpowers, which is, by definition, the opposite of autism. Once, someone on the Wrong Planet forums got angry at me for saying that difficulty communicating is the main problem of autism, which is, come on, man, that's the diagnostic criteria. You can't get a diagnosis without it. How dare you say that ice cream is a frozen dairy dessert? Maybe my hot beef stew is ice cream. Did you ever think of that? Moreover, my wife Tiffany and I have been personally harassed by the autistic local chapter organizer of a major autistic self-advocacy group. She was duped into it by a con artist who literally called herself the Aspie Whisperer because she preys on autistic people. When I brought this problem to the national organization, they asked me for the local organizer's name and then proceeded to ignore every subsequent attempt at communication with them. So I never got the mediated discussion I wanted to resolve those issues. Is that any different than normies? Seriously, just try getting any kind of support from YouTube. So fair warning, if you happen to be autistic and would like support from the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, they're gonna make you advocate for yourself. Fuck you if you want their help. That autistic local chapter organizer I mentioned did, however, encourage the con artist to file civil menacing or stalking charges against my wife, which absolutely wrecked me emotionally for several weeks, but thankfully didn't go anywhere because once her and my wife were in the courtroom with the judge could tell that it was obvious that she was lying through her teeth, So yes, I know autistic people can be abusive. I'm just pointing out that it's rare, and in fact, several recent experimental studies have shown that autistic people are much more concerned than normies about morality and ethics. Specifically, the research indicates we're usually unwilling or unable to do anything we think might hurt someone, even if it would benefit us personally. Yes, exceptions, I know. So we can't be bribed to hurt people.
I can do this all day.
But these studies call not hurting people for our own gain a deficiency. Because come on, who doesn't want to be a contestant in the Squid Game?
Listen up. You should learn to share. Is it that hard? You dumbass. You just killed someone over there. Can't you hear me, huh? Help us now. A man just died.
That's the way you play the Squid Game. That's what happens in the Squid Game.
I used to get chewed out working tech support for spending too much time on the call, despite having the highest satisfaction rate. What's the big deal? It's not like fixing their computers was our job. Oh, it was our job? Okay, I see now. That makes sense. I had coworkers who didn't get chewed out, who bragged about ignoring the customer's problem, telling them to reinstall Windows and then hanging up on them. Apparently, these researchers think I was supposed to be a useless tool to people who had paid for support contracts, because that's how you win in a meritocracy. Thanks, science!
Your call is very important to us. Your estimated wait time is 93 minutes.
We're waiting around for scientists to realize that hurting people for your own gain is bad, actually. Like, maybe there should be a study on that. In addition to branding brutally honest autistic people as liars based on a vibe, normies also incorrectly assume that autistic people are like themselves, and as a result are prone to scapegoating us as manipulative abusers based on flimsy evidence of behaviors seen in non-autistic people.
Why autistic people are sometimes accused of manipulation or being toxic. Now, this is a really tricky but important part because I want to acknowledge that autistic people can and do abuse others. However, I would argue that it is more common that our behavior is misinterpreted by others than genuinely intended to manipulate. And this is something that I really struggled with while writing the script. Part of the reason it's taken me over a year to finish. Because I saw a lot of behaviors that I myself had done in the past, but for different reasons. Non-manipulative reasons, autistic reasons. And it's not happened a lot, but it's happened enough that being accused of manipulating on purpose, being toxic, being a terrible person, has really hurt me and really done damage to the way that I see myself. For example, rude things, maybe autistic bluntness or lack of socializing experience or understanding. Seeming to draw people into arguments or intellectual bullying can actually be info dumping or needing to correct misinformation or clarifying what someone has said. Getting too close too quickly can be autistic oversharing, and not understanding the social rules of how relationships progress. Oversharing to gain control versus autistic oversharing. That's not to say autistic oversharing is always appropriate, but the reasons behind these behaviors are not always manipulative, and that's kind of the point I'm trying to make. But when a non-autistic person is part of that conversation, it might seem like the autistic person is purposefully recentering a conversation on themselves, or trying to one-up the other person, when really we're just trying to show you that we understand how you're feeling because this same thing happened to us that one time.
So if you think that an autistic person is trying to manipulate or abuse you, you should take a minute to step back and think if there are any possible alternative explanations. Particularly, and probably the most common one being, a misunderstanding. Especially if you happen to be using some kind of system or checklist. Because I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say it's probably based on observing normies, not the 1 or 2% of people who are autistic. Seriously, like 90% of the trauma in my life stems from some kind of miscommunication.
I can't do anything with this dog. He doesn't eat, he won't respond to commands. I can't even.
That's a cat?
Listen, buddy, I bought the best dog training manual on the market.
I sell the things you need to be. I'm the smiling face on your TV. Oh, I'm the cult of personality.
If I can give some advice from someone who's fucked up enough in social situations, never accuse someone you're arguing with of Darvo. Come here for a second. Come here. I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. It will never end well. The only thing making that accusation is gonna do is escalate the argument. The best case scenario is the person you're arguing with takes it in stride, but thinks it's super douchey.
Dude, seriously, I read this Wikipedia article that says like, you're being a real asshole right now, right? So why don't you take a chill pill and we'll talk when you realize you were wrong.
And lordy, does it not matter whether you are correct. Personally, I gave up on the idea that being correct should influence people a long time ago, and it's still frustrating. Maybe it has something to do with a lifetime of me being brutally honest, and also branded a liar. The myth of meritocracy tells us there's a marketplace of ideas where, through the magic of competition in the court of public opinion, the best and truest ideas always come out on top. That's why doctors never anesthetized babies before surgery, because they thought babies couldn't feel pain until 1987. In truth, people would mostly rather hear a slick lie than an uncomfortable truth clumsily told. Told clumsily? So even in formal public debates, the truth is little more than window dressing, and pathological liars like Fucker Carlson and PragerU dominate the marketplace of ideas. And oppressed people on the bottom of the meritocracy's required competition, poor, disabled, old, women, people of color, are scarcely heard regarding the nature of their oppression. Instead, the court of public opinion mostly listens to their oppressors. I mentioned groups like Autism Speaks pushing dubious cures without including any autistic people, and how ABA therapy is legally and culturally accepted practice despite many graphic depictions of its harm from the survivors. But those are just the tip of the bullshit iceberg that is oppressors speaking over the people they oppress. Just think about the wall-to-wall news coverage given to the opinions of big oil lobbyists, and then ask yourself, how often do Fox News or CNN interview an indigenous water protector? If that didn't do it for you, whose opinions get the most airtime regarding employers struggling to get people to work shitty, below living wage jobs in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic? How many minimum wage earners do you see CNN interviewing on the picket line? Or do they mostly bring CEOs and pundits and lobbyists into their comfy, climate-controlled studios? How many interviews have you seen with the refugees detained in the concentration camps at the US southern border? Or are interviews about that usually with lily-white, wealthy talking heads? For a long time, majority public opinion generally followed the meritocratic notion that poor people are only poor or even homeless because they're lazy and refuse to work. An idea definitely conceived by rich motherfuckers. Because the term sweatshop is definitely about how hard it is to own the shop. I mean, poor people just don't know how hard it is to light a cigar with a $100 bill.
Operator, this is Group Captain Lionel Mandrake. I'm speaking from Burleson Air Force Base. Look, something very urgent has come up, and I want you to place an emergency person-to-person call with President Merkin Muffley in the Pentagon, Washington, D.C.
A whole lot of news stories about how shoplifting and stealing from retailers is on an upswing and going to be hitting an all-time high.
The New York Police Department, they're bragging about seizing diapers, baby wipes, formula to the tune of $1,800. And I'm like, would y'all get a load of these losers?
No, I'm perfectly serious, Operator. The President, yes, the President of the United States. Oh, I'm sorry, I haven't got enough change. Could you make this a collect call, Operator?
And about how we literally have to put fucking soldiers with AR-15s in shopping malls to protect all the private property because theft is just the implosion of society. Well, here's a little graphic to remind you, once again, that the biggest thieves, the people who steal the most, and the people who are held accountable the least are the people who pay workers. It's bosses, it's companies, it's corporations. They are stealing from hundreds of millions of American workers every single year, but you never hear about them being in trouble, getting arrested, or going to jail.
Because these items were shoplifted and there was complaints of larceny, they did a sting. I don't know if it was a no-knock warrant. I don't know if they put on their tactical gear. I don't know if it was SEAL Team 6, but I can let the people of New York be rest assured that the violent offenders who stole diapers for their babies have been apprehended, and that's what your tax dollars are going to.
When an employer doesn't pay an employee what they owe, it's called wage theft. Your labor has value, and when you provide your labor without getting paid for it, you are literally being stolen from. Hey man, have you seen my $15 billion? What? No, go back to work. Go back to work. Wage thieves stole at least $15 billion from the American worker in 2020 alone.
23 warrants, 23 individuals.
23.
And if you divide $1,800 by 23 people.
Come on, man. They just took down people for $78 a piece.
They won't accept the call. Have you got 55 cents?
Well, you don't think I'd go into combat with loose change in my pocket, do you?
One city's, this is not a state, this is one city's police budget.
Police department.
Yes, $5.1 billion.
Our policy here is to say that we are hiring and we tell them one number just to get them in for the interview, and then get this, we tell them what we really pay. It's the old switcheroo, we fake lift and then go unlivable wage.
I got approved 3 times the rent for income in 2 weeks, and I can't. And it doesn't matter that I'm working multiple jobs. It doesn't matter that I barely sleep and can barely afford to feed myself.
Oh, blast. I'm still 20 cents short.
The combined wealth of the 657 billionaires in the country grew more than $1.3 trillion.
$1.3 trillion richer.
$1.3 trillion richer.
Diabetic kindergartner selling pumpkins to raise money for service dog. Seems really cool, seems really uplifting. It's an older article, but it's a copy-paste from 1,000 other feel-good stories we've heard before.
Again, making it much easier for President Reagan to appropriate King for his own uses. And those uses were gutting the policies MLK advocated for in favor of the Reaganomic free market liberalism that funneled wealth from the poor to the wealthy. But the trick is that focusing exclusively on the I have a dream speech and misinterpreting it entirely allowed neoliberals to turn MLK into some weird conservative libertarian who wouldn't have wanted all this big government stuff.
You see, the police in the United States do have an incredibly racist history. The origin of modern policing in the United States literally came from slave patrol. So is it really so surprising that these Republicans, who are predominantly white to be very clear, think that the police won't do anything about their bad behavior, but will go out of their way to police their black neighbors? And there's plenty of data to back this up too. Like, for example, did you know that white Americans, statistically speaking, are more likely to be drug dealers than their black neighbors? Now, you wouldn't think that if you looked at crime statistics.
He doesn't want a race-conscious system of justice? That doesn't sound very colorblind, guys. Doesn't sound very content of our character. My best buddy MLK would definitely not approve. But of course he did. Don't be fooled. Actually listen to the guy for once.
We must also realize that the problems of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power. We must further recognize that the ghetto is a domestic colony. Black people must develop programs that will aid in the transfer of power and wealth into the hands of residents of the ghetto so that they may in reality control their own destinies.
And that's just 2 snippets out of many. Watch this video if you want a more complete picture.
That Coca-Cola machine, I want you to shoot the lock off it. There may be some change in there.
That's private property.
They understand autism as a medical condition, a disorder, even as a tragedy. In the medical paradigm, we're taught to believe that there's a correct way to develop neurologically, that there's a right way for our brains to work, the normal way, and that any other way of developing is wrong and needs to be treated and fixed.
Colonel, can you possibly imagine what is going to happen to you, your frame, outlook, way of life and everything, when they learn that you have obstructed a telephone call to the President of the United States? Can you imagine?
Finding out that I'm autistic had completely changed my life for the better. How could something that was so positive for me be such a bad thing? So I went back to Dr. Google, but this time I dug deeper. I started to find information about autism that was written not by researchers or other professionals, but by actual autistic people. I discovered a thing called the neurodiversity paradigm. The neurodiversity paradigm is an alternative way of thinking about autism. It describes autism as a part of the range of natural variation in human neurological development. At its very simplest, autism is a different way of thinking.
Shoot it off! Shoot with a gun! That's what the bullets are for, you twit!
Okay. I'm gonna get your money for you. But if you don't get the President of the United States on that phone, you know what's gonna happen to you?
What?
You're gonna have to answer to the Coca-Cola company.
Oppressors talking over the oppressed is why the expression "nothing about us without us" came out of the American disability rights movement, where disability policy is often written without input from disabled people. The inspiration porn I mentioned earlier is often a thought-terminating cliche to reinforce the meritocracy. It erases disabled voices by using cherry-picked examples to say, see, this legless woman exercises, so you just have a victim mindset. I've focused on autism here because I am autistic, but autism is just one of many kinds of neurodivergence. And using autism as a catch-all sometimes helps to erase the voices of other neurodivergencies like dyslexia, dyspraxia, or attention deficit. I may have done this a bit myself by using the word normies to avoid words like allistic, which only one or two of the people watching here are likely to know. Speaking of talking over marginalized people, there's an old idea in disability advocacy called person-first language. That instead of saying addict, for example, you should say person with an addiction. And I get why that example might be preferable, but most of us actually autistic people prefer identity-first language. Person with autism is kind of like person with opinions. Yes, I also have opinions, but those opinions are also me. Like, if I didn't have opinions, who would I be? More importantly, person with autism actually emphasizes the idea that the autism is bad. Because I also call myself a short bisexual dude, not a person with a height deficit, flexible sexual orientation, and a Y chromosome. So like a lot of fat acceptance advocates try to remove that stigma, those of us who are actually autistic often also try to remove the stigma of being on the wrong planet. I've still had a conversation or two with people who insisted that I call myself a person with autism. So here's my compromise to those folks. I'll call myself a person with autism, and when your grandma asks me where I work, instead of saying I'm a comedian, I'll tell her I'm a person with dick jokes.
Every time I say I'm autistic, I get so many people, mostly neurotypicals, which means they do not have autism or ADHD or any of that stuff, being like, person first pronouns please. The difference with autism and other mental disorders is that I'm always autistic. I cannot separate my autism from anything I do or anything I am ever. So feel free to use them interchangeably, at least for me. Thanks.
Anyway, the point I was making is about how it doesn't matter how correct you might be when you want to accuse someone of Darvo during an argument. In part because objective facts don't change anyone's mind about, well, anything. Adam Conover's made a career out of showing us all the shit we believe that's just plain wrong. Like the science is in, cranberry pills do fuck all for a urinary infection. But the science isn't stopping my wife from buying them.
The discussion very quickly became about everything except the evidence, and I think it's important to bear that episode in mind today, because I've read a lot of articles that just repeat the evidence about the COVID vaccine in an exasperated tone, and from our research at least, it doesn't seem like that's gonna cut through because of how unvaccinated people see the rest of us.
You may be totally correct accusing someone of Darvo, but ultimately, it's academic jargon for gaslighting in an I know you are, but what am I sort of way. So unless you're a licensed therapist...
Well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
And on a more personal note, Larry, you need a thicker fucking skin. If you can't take criticism, if you can't handle someone gently suggesting that you might have handled a situation better without losing your goddamn shit and accusing them of being abusive, you have no business being a group moderator. And for fuck's sake, if you're going to accuse people of Darvo, you had better be fucking prepared to accept that accusation on yourself gracefully.
When illusions spin her net liberty she pirouette. When I think that I am free.
There was a time that my autism was invisible to me, actually. Well, sort of. I always knew that I was struggling, but until I got my diagnosis in my early 30s, I thought everyone else was dealing with these same issues.
Get high functioning and low functioning out of your vocabulary. It doesn't help anybody. I know you might think that saying oh, you're high functioning is a compliment. It's not a compliment. It's actually like a reminder that I'm just masking, and it's so hard. Masking is the most exhausting thing in the world. It's my New Year's resolution actually to not mask. That means showing my autistic traits and not, pretending like I'm someone I'm not and just being more myself. High functioning is basically a label that you can use to be like, oh, your autism doesn't affect me that much. But I'll tell you, everyone you think is high functioning is greatly affected by their autism.
Now that I'm diagnosed, my autism isn't invisible to me. It's not invisible to autistic people in general. I can't forget that I'm autistic. Every time I open my mouth, every time I type a single word in an email. But I don't seem autistic. So you can and do forget. And without constant reminders, you don't think I'm struggling to fit in. You think I'm choosing to be an asshole. And I don't necessarily blame you for that. I certainly think being fucker Carlson is a choice. But if I remind you that I'm autistic, you say I'm using my autism as an excuse to be a deliberate asshole. Which is super. Really, just great stuff all around. I realize you're not aware of this, but it's ableist of you to insist on the meritocracy, on judging us by the same standard, and then calling us assholes for not fitting in better. I'm not like someone who needs a wheelchair. I can't just tell you I need a ramp, because my disability, my autism, is invisible. Telling me that it doesn't matter that I'm autistic, and that my apology was an attack, is functionally the same as getting angry at a wheelchair user for struggling with a narrow door. So when you tell me, you don't have to remind us you're autistic, we know, and that reminding you I'm autistic makes me seem insincere, kinda tells me that you don't know, actually. You don't know that you were raised steeped in meritocratic ableism that tells you anyone talking to you about their disability is just a whiner who needs to grab them bootstraps. Because the alternative is that if you know what you're saying, that means you don't care. And what you're really saying is, shut up already about your disability. Because you just don't want to be reminded how difficult every conversation is for us. You can forget about it and go back to brunch and continue to assume I annoy you on purpose because I get off on it or something. Abled people telling us to stop talking about our autism seems to me not unlike straight people telling LGBT people to get back in the closet, or white people telling people of color to just shut up and stop injecting race into everything. You're saying that meritocracy is working and it's our fault that we're struggling or suffering, that we brought it on ourselves with our bad choices. Choices like reminding you about our struggles when you want us to not seem autistic, so you can forget and go back to brunch.
There must be some kind of way out of here, said the joker to the thief. There's too much confusion, I can't get no relief.
So I say fuck the meritocracy. Stop measuring everyone by the same standard. Stop treating people like interchangeable cogs for the capitalist death machine to chew up and spit out. Meet people where they are and support them with the accommodations they need for their invisible disabilities, or visible disabilities, or no disabilities. Normalize saying, I need accommodations without shame or guilt. Treat people as individuals and let the chips fall.
If being human is not simply a matter of being born flesh and blood, if it is instead a way of thinking, acting, and feeling, then I am hopeful that one day I will discover my own humanity. Begin Night Watch. Until then, Commander Maddox, I will continue learning, changing, growing, and trying to become more than what I am.
Because our communication challenges alienate us so much, many autistic people have an unusual sense of humor. Our jokes often don't really translate for normies or vice versa.
What if the salicylic acids don't accept the hydroxyl ion? And the professor responds, that's no hydroxyl ion, that's my wife!
There may be a correlation between humor and sex. The need for more research is clearly indicated.
I remember seeing one autistic guy who used his 160-character Twitter bio to absolutely rage against the entire concept of writing comedy, insisting that people are only funny when they're not trying to be. My dad insists he has no sense of humor of any kind, but I've seen him enjoy George Carlin. So I must be a masochist to give up software engineering for a career in comedy. Or maybe I just want to ride the ball.